Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The second consequence for a world in the saturation phase was that global temperatures would become more extreme. While temperate climates, like in most of Europe, would remain largely unaffected, the poles and equator would see severe cooling or warming, respectively. This was why Eric and his group still encountered quite a bit of ice along the way despite the warm season. Were it winter, they would have most certainly had a walk. Last but not least was the main reason, besides revenge, why Eric and Alora were happy to be on Earth. The instability of Ethereum and its integration with the world would allow for much faster strength growth compared to other worlds, not only in the absorption of Ethereum, but also in understanding glyphs and runes. After all, the Ethereum integration caused the world's elements to be in constant flux, allowing for a much quicker understanding of those elements. While elemental understanding was not particularly important for a person's strength, it did influence the speed by which one would grow to understand their glyph or rune. The only reason most people in Europe were still only first-rank initiates was that they had spent the last 7 years focusing primarily on survival. That said, now that the Council was stabilizing the continent, there would likely be an explosive growth in power among the population. In fact, if the other continents stabilized earlier than Europe, they might have a severe power advantage over them. Meanwhile, Eric still needed twice as much time as anyone else to advance because he had 2 systems to work on, so coming to a world in its saturation phase was like a golden goose falling in his lap. Just in time, too. During the past 7 years, Alora has been heavily boosting Eric's growth with the resources she gained from her mother before she left the Obsidian Enclave, which was the only reason Eric had managed to become a rank 2, despite his limitation. But those resources were quickly running out, so finding this world was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, everyone on Earth gained the same benefits, so Eric still had to work harder than anyone else. The benefits would only really show if he returned to Sol. Yet, they couldn't simply find a place somewhere and quietly grow stronger, assuming Alora could convince Eric to put his revenge on hold, because the saturation phase would simply not last forever, which meant they had to prepare for Phase 2. Luckily, Phase 1 would last for a few more years, even if it was uncertain how long it would last exactly. Meanwhile, Eric and Alora still had plenty to do. Their ships sailed around the North Cape, and now cruised close by the coast, mere moments away from reaching Kirkins. Emily was currently captaining the ship after learning everything she could from the old man she had enslaved back in London. As it turned out, Emily had a talent for many things, sigils and sailing included. The old captain had already been left behind on the Danish coast, with all his memories wiped. Since he was a relatively good man, and simply dumping him on a beach somewhere took little effort, Eric thought it unnecessary to kill the guy. Alora grumbled a little about the extra time, however slight it was, but Eric managed to placate her in the end. Perhaps leaving him alone in the wilderness signed his death warrant anyway, considering the way the world is now, but at least he stood a chance. They certainly didn't want to alert anyone by dropping him off in a more inhabited area. Along the way, the ship came across several other small docks, but never noticed any signs of life. That wasn't entirely unexpected, though. They knew from Serafina that the Council hadn't reached this far north yet, and the population had always been sparse here. It was not too much of a stretch to consider the possibility of most, if not all, of the people here simply exploding when the awakening happened. That said, the few vampires and werewolf that lived here should have survived still. Perhaps they had all killed each other? Only time would tell. Finally, they saw the coastal port of Kirkins appear in their view. Emily was at the helm, her hands navigating the ship with surprising grace, considering her inexperience. Emma, Alora, and Eric were leaning against the railing, their eyes fixed on the little town gradually approaching on the horizon. An eerie silence enveloped the port. Several ships, some nothing more than half-sunken relics or aimlessly drifting vessels, painted a haunting picture of the world that once was. Sails reeled in, the electric motor hummed, and their ship glided past the haunting metal skeletons of icebreakers, fishing ships, and trading vessels. "It's a little spooky," Emma commented, breaking the silence. Eric nodded before a frown appeared on his face, and his gaze drifted to something ashore. Soon, they were aligned with a docking port. Eric jumped ashore and tied the boat to the cleats before casting a distant look at the familiar, yet not so familiar surroundings. Nostalgia and sadness surged as he surveyed the town he'd once visited with his father. How long had it been since those carefree days of simply buying supplies for their community? Their small and remote village had been a tight-knit, closed-off community. For good reason, of course. And young, somewhat timid Eric didn't mind so much back then. He enjoyed the simple lifestyle and wasn't interested in exploring the wide-open world. Things were different now, of course. In his 7 years on Sol, he had learned to crave adventure, challenges, and fighting. Yet even back on Earth, the monthly trips to Kirkins were a highlight for him. Not so much for the chance to witness a part of the world beyond, but more because Etta always wanted to come along. So he went along to spend time with her. Memories of youthful love and laughter flashed through his mind. His father busy with goods on the docks, and a carefree Etta grabbing his hand, pulling him along to see if any new wonders had appeared from faraway lands. Her golden hair, bright blue eyes, and infectious smile filled the young Eric with love and affection. Yet, the older Eric, recalling these moments, felt only a bitter mixture of sadness and fury. At some point in the past, when her betrayal was not so fresh anymore, a part of his fury had transformed into a yearning for understanding. Understanding of how a young, seemingly innocent child deceived not only him, but their entire community. But the older Eric's eyes turned cold. Those doubts were all in the past. Eventually, that yearning had made way for fury once again. In the following years, it only became stronger and more entrenched in his being. As he set foot on the familiar docks of Kirkins, Eric couldn't escape the raw emotions conjured by these memories. The town that once symbolized innocent joy now stood as a backdrop to a betrayal that had cost him everything. His fists clenched involuntarily. Despite the 7 years that had gone by, his past was an unyielding specter. Now, amidst the remnants of civilization, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking back into the heart of his deepest wounds. There was a reason he almost ran off without even thinking when he realized they were on Earth. He was eager to put it all behind him. But for that, he first had to find Etta and pay respects to the fallen. He didn't make himself any illusions about being able to find bodies after all this time. But perhaps he could still make a symbolic grave in memory of his parents. He was pulled out of his thoughts by 2 small hands that encircled his left fist. He looked beside him with some surprise, but his expression quickly softened when he looked at Emma's encouraging smile. "I don't know why we're here, but you seem distressed. No matter what happened in the past, you're not alone now. Please let me help however I can." It was true. Eric had never mentioned the reason for their travel to Kirkins. Yet Emma had never asked, happy to just follow along. Meanwhile, Emily had been too preoccupied with other things. Alora appeared on the other side and grabbed his right hand. Yet instead of an encouraging smile, there was a playful smirk. "Honestly, that girl is much too sweet. I hate it. Yet, it's almost impossible not to like her. Truly, it's a conundrum. I almost find myself hoping she'll pass the test." Eric could feel the concern and support flowing through their bond, despite her actions and words. Meanwhile, he couldn't help but smirk at Alora's mention of her test. He had to admit he was curious about the results. So far, no one had passed, but he really liked Emma. Putting those concerns aside for later, he unclenched his fists and took Emma and Alora's hands before turning to the white-haired girl on his left with a smile. "I used to live not far from here before the awakening. We've come to pay a visit." Emma looked at the surroundings in wonder. "Sir was born here?" Eric smiled at the curiosity in her voice before shrugging. "Not in this town exactly, but somewhere near here." "I see," Emma mumbled. Then she blushed a little. "I'm actually a little surprised. At some point, I had this weird idea that you and Miss Alora were from some other world or planet. It wasn't exactly a strange thought. They knew a lot about magic, but very little about the current Earth, and Alora was either not human or had gone through some bizarre mutations. Still, Eric's lips curled up, and he patted Emma's head. That intuition of yours is truly terrifying. It wasn't time for a big reveal just yet, though. So he continued, we'll tell you about our past someday. Meanwhile, Emily had joined them as well. However, she remained silent and avoided looking into Eric's eyes. Ever since Emma had poured her heart out to her big sister, Emily had tried to avoid him as much as possible, and he had let her. He knew Emily needed some time to figure out her own emotions and desires now that she was no longer controlled by her corruption and had been told in no uncertain terms that Emma didn't want her protection anymore. Nodding to Emily in greeting, Eric turned towards the town. He began walking over the wooden pier with Emma and Emily in tow, while Alora shrunk down and sat on Eric's shoulder. They were all wearing the outfits they had left London with since they didn't have the time to pack much else back then. Luckily, that simply provided Eric another chance to teach them a lesson in Ethereum usage and control by having them clean their clothes with it. Eric was in his standard black armor, and Alora was in her usual corset and skirt as well, although hers was simply conjured by magic and could be whatever she wanted it to be. Emily still had a black crop top and edgy cargo pants with chains, and lastly, Emma wore her maid outfit. Kirkins resembled a frigid ghost town with the remnants of a once-active port now entombed in a layer of snow and ice. Skeletal structures of various offices and warehouses, covered in a white blanket, loomed overhead. They were marred by signs of destruction, but not only by earthquakes. Several buildings had scorch marks, while others had clearly man-made holes. Everything appeared in a state of disrepair and abandonment. It seemed apparent that no one had been here in a long time, yet something was strange. Emily mumbled, more to herself than the rest of the group. Where are all the bodies? While there was snow, it wasn't deep enough to hide anything. After all, despite the temperatures becoming more extreme on Earth, it was still summer, and they were only in a subarctic climate, so most of the time, they remained above the freezing point. Eric and Alora nodded at her words. Eric answered, good question. There's clearly been fighting here, but no bodies. I guess it's possible the survivors wanted to bury their friends and allies, but why would they remove the bodies of whoever they were fighting with as well? It might make sense if they were going to stay here, but this place seems abandoned. Speaking of which, where are the survivors? I assume they fought over control of this town, but then why not stay? The others remained quiet, and his questions went unanswered, as they had no idea either. They walked deeper into town, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the light snow. Occasionally, a gust of wind would send loose snow dancing through the air. The eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creaking of a loose sign or the distant howl of the wind, making Emma and Emily jump up a little. Meanwhile, Eric was a little lost in memories, and Elora looked around from atop Eric's shoulder, frowning as if searching for something. As they ventured further, the buildings closed in around them. Once bustling shops and cafes stood frozen in time, their shattered windows telling tales of the chaos that had unfolded here in the past. A rusty swing creaked in the breeze at a desolate playground, and abandoned vehicles, both large and small, were half buried in snowbanks, silent witnesses to the town's abrupt abandonment. They all kept quiet as they felt the weight of the past press down on them. Even Alora looked solemn and alert. Sometimes, her eyes would suddenly dart to a spot and squint before looking away again. Still lost in memories, Eric noticed a cafe where he, his father, and Etta would eat lunch when they came for supplies. He could see himself laughing and smiling, but found the memory bitter. His father's name was Leifer, and he had always been a kind and peaceful man. In fact, back then, many people would say Eric took after him the most. His mother, Runa, on the other hand, was bolder and enjoyed challenging Eric in various ways, perhaps hoping to pull him out of his passivity. Eric knew she loved his father, but clearly she wanted her son to be a little more energetic and adventurous, likely so she could have more in common with him. Thinking about his mother made Eric smile. While he didn't always get along with her in the past, he loved her like no other, because he could always see the overflowing fondness and passion in her eyes. He realized Runa would immensely enjoy the person he had become, even if it required her death to do it. It was his mother who pushed most heavily to continue the training they gave him, despite Eric's disinterest at the time. Leifer would often attempt to talk her down a little, but frankly, Eric's father was a pushover when it came to Runa. Eric chuckled as he realized he would have likely turned out the same if he hadn't met Alora. She didn't want to push over for a protector or a husband and partner, so she had spent significant effort in changing him. Eric didn't mind. He liked who he had become, and he loved Alora. He was naturally immensely thankful for their training now. He would never have survived the night of Edda's betrayal otherwise, not to mention that it had made the beginning of his life in so much easier. Looking at that cafe, a specific memory came to him. The 15-year-old him was sitting at one of the tables with his father and looked a little glum. This time, Leifer had opted to leave Edda behind and take only Eric. But that was not the reason Eric was a little down. Leifer had brought Eric out here because he had once again fought with his mother about the nearly endless training she had made him go through. Leifer put a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Talk to me, my boy. You know it's never good to leave anything unsaid, especially when it comes to family." Young Eric sighed with a hint of frustration in his voice. "She's relentless about the training, Dad. Day in and day out. I'm constantly either fighting, learning, or getting my body conditioned somehow. I love Mom and know she loves me, but I wish she could understand that it's not what I want. What use are these skills anyway? Who are we fighting? The community is perfectly safe and comfortable." Leifer nodded understandingly. "Your mother has always had a strong will, Eric. She believes in preparing you for a future that might not be as kind as the present. It's her way of showing love, even if it doesn't always feel like it." "I know, Dad, but I'm just not interested in all that. I just want a normal life, get together with Edda, live in the village peacefully away from constant drills and training," Eric protested. Leifer paused, choosing his words carefully. "Son, your mother simply worries about what might happen when we're no longer around. The world can be challenging, and she wants you to be ready for anything." Eric glanced at his father, frustration evident in his eyes. "I know you two worry about me, but sometimes I feel like I'm being pushed too hard." Leifer sighed, his gaze drifting to the horizon. "I won't deny that your mother can be a bit brash in her methods, but she sees great things destined for you. You have a strength within you that even I didn't possess at your age. There's a reason she pushes you to your limits." Eric furrowed his brow, skepticism and curiosity filling his expression. "What great things could I possibly be destined for when there's no way I'll ever even defeat Mom? Uncle Vilger, a Werbear, stands no chance in a wrestling match with her, let alone me." Leifer smiled warmly. "Your mother is special, my son. You'll learn about that when you're older. Please, just humor her for a little longer, all right?" Younger Eric sighed and nodded at the same time as Alora pulled the older Eric out of his memories, speaking through their mental connection. "We're being watched." At the same time as Alora's warning, Emma's intuition also reared its head. She prodded Eric's side and whispered, "Sir, I can't shake this feeling that we're being watched." Her gaze darted nervously between the empty buildings. Only now did Eric, too, feel the weight of unseen eyes upon them. It appeared this town might not be as deserted as it appeared. He cautiously eyed his surroundings. "I suppose we'll have to deal with that then." He put thoughts of the memory he just relived out of his mind for now, but reminded himself to talk to Alora about it later. His father said some things that, while innocent at the time, seemed a lot more interesting considering what he knew now. They were currently right in the middle of a broad street. If the small town of Kirkins could be considered to have a main street sporting most of the town's cafes and shops, then this was it. It was the perfect place for an ambush. They probably would have been a little more careful if Eric hadn't been lost in memories. Suddenly, a loud shriek filled the air. An equally loud male voice followed. "Go on, you wretches, show yourselves. They've already discovered you. But don't you dare attack before I give the word." More shrieks followed before a large number of strange pale creatures emerged from windows, doors, and alleyways. Even the roofs were quickly covered in these creatures. Before they knew it, The group had been surrounded by at least 50 of these things. Each of them had different reactions. Alora looked unconcerned but still transformed into a cloud of light specks and merged with Eric, making him the strongest he could be. Eric looked equally unconcerned as he raised an eyebrow and inspected the creatures around them. Yet there was a twinkle of excitement in his eyes. He'd been getting antsy, sitting around doing nothing but absorbing energy, training, sex, and researching his runes or glyphs for 2 weeks. Sure, the sex was fun, but he'd been aching for a fight. Emily's expression was very different. It was a wicked and bloodthirsty smile. She, too, had been getting antsy during the boat ride, but instead of wanting to fight something, she'd been hoping for an excuse to go on a killing spree and work off some stress. As predicted, her corruption still had plenty of effect on her. Lastly, Emma looked anxious at first, but when she noticed Eric's lack of reaction, she quickly calmed down. She had no reason to be afraid, since her sir apparently saw no serious threat. Such was her trust in him. Eric and Alora, through him, continued to inspect the creatures until they came to a conclusion. They were vampires. At least, sort of. Their red eyes lacked any sign of critical thinking. Their nails had grown into claws, and their pale skin was wrinkled like that of a corpse. Most of them were either naked or wore rags that weren't much better. According to Laura, these creatures were all rank 1 runebound, explaining why their bodies seemed fine despite the cold. Eric's mind immediately recalled the teachings of his parents on the subject of vampires, identifying the ominous creatures before them as ghouls. Ghouls, he knew, were what vampires turned into after prolonged periods without blood. Contrary to the expectation that vampires weakened by blood deprivation would be feeble, these ghouls were anything but. In fact, they exhibited a strength that defied their presumed vulnerability. In the lore passed down by Eric's parents, vampires undergoing blood deprivation would initially experience a gradual decline in power. However, as they reached their lowest point, an unexpected reversal occurred. Their strength would begin to rise again. The catch: this resurgence came at the cost of intelligence and reasoning, rather than blood. Remarkably, this condition wasn't irreversible, provided the vampire hadn't lingered as a ghoul for too long. A replenishment of blood could revert the transformation. Before the awakening, knowledge of a vampire's ability to transform into a ghoul was not widespread. It was a rare occurrence, and those who underwent the transformation were typically dispatched swiftly by hunters or fellow vampires, or managed to find bodies to drain in order to regain their vampire form. Despite the rarity of such transformations, Eric's parents adamantly asserted the existence of ghouls in the realm of vampires. The thing is, ghouls are supposed to be mindless creatures who crave blood and attempt to kill and drain whatever is nearest to them. But these ghouls were clearly following orders and waiting patiently despite the apparent insanity behind their eyes. But now was not the time to consider the reasoning for that. Suddenly, a well-dressed regular vampire stepped forward on one of the roofs and looked down at the group with clear condescension. According to Laura, this man was a second-rank runebound, but likely wouldn't be able to tell the strength of Eric and Emily from that distance. The man grinned maliciously. Well, if it isn't the start of a classic post-apocalyptic joke. An armored marauder, an edgy tomb raider, and a maid walk into a bar, or rather, hobble into post-apocalyptic ruins. I must have taken a wrong turn at the punchline. I'm surprised to see any humans traveling freely. However, I figured they would have died out or been enslaved across the world. Looking at this group of people, the man actually assumed Eric was a human because of his armor, which didn't seem friendly to shape-shifting, while Emma and Emily were shapeshifters because of their light clothing despite the cold. He clearly didn't know humans could protect themselves from the cold with Ethereum. The roof man continued, "Well, no matter. Unless you people want these wretches here to rough you up a little first, I suggest you come with me." Quietly, Eric looked up at him calmly. "Your words seem to suggest humans aren't doing so well in these lands. And where exactly are you intending to take us?" The man raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "Oh, you don't seem particularly concerned. Well, no matter, I don't mind explaining." He spread his arms in an elegant flourish and spoke with pedantic pride in his voice. I'm not surprised you don't know, since you came by boat and all, but these lands are ruled by Sigurd Blackthorn. In my lord's infinite wisdom, he has determined that all non-vampires will be used as blood banks. And since non-vampires include you three, you'll have to come with me to one of our blood farms. Willingly, or less so. He shrugged nonchalantly. As for humans, why would they be doing well? Their squishy bodies can't even handle the cold without thick clothing and heating. Most of them died out 7 years ago, anyway. It appeared that humans never had much of a chance to develop their power here. It made sense, however, as supernaturals had likely outnumbered humans after the awakening. The man smiled maliciously again. So, shall we go? Eric cocked his head to the side. Let me think about that for a moment. Instead of speaking further, he lifted his hand and touched one of his lightning glyphs. A whirling and cracking mass of lightning formed. Here's my answer. He launched the concussive lightning blast straight at the building on which the vampire man was standing. It sailed through the air, and before anyone could react, it exploded, causing the building to collapse. The man screeched in anger as he quickly moved back to avoid falling down and being buried by rubble. Damn you, you walking blood bag. Wretches, attack, and don't you dare kill any of them. For every one of them that dies, I'll kill 10 of you. The man disappeared behind the mass of pale creatures while the building he stood on continued coming down under loud crashing sounds and a chorus of screeching ghouls. Finally, being given the order to unleash hell, the tide of 50-plus ghouls charged at Eric's group with wild abandon, loud growls and spit flying everywhere. Emily laughed maliciously and excitedly as various pitch-black magic circles appeared around her. Emma looked anxious and closed her eyes. Calm down, Emma. Sir can handle this. Remember what he said I should do when a fight starts. Protect yourself and don't move until it's over. Luckily, Emma's first nature spell was ideally suited for that goal. A bright green magic circle appeared. Vines sprang forth from the snowy ground, and she was soon encased in a thick bramble of thorns and branches. Seeing Emma remember his instructions, Eric focused on other things. For example, his excitement. His expression morphed into excited savagery. It's been a long time since I went 2 weeks without a fight. Time to let loose. He howled his excitement into the air and prepared to engage with the many ghouls as lightning began to course through his body, and a light sheen of ice covered his armor. Despite his excitement, he did take this fight seriously. After all, rank 1 they may be, but there were still a lot of them, and he also needed to keep an eye on Emily and Emma. Their bodies were a lot less durable than his, after all. The air crackled with Ethereum energy as Eric and Emily prepared to face the ghoulish onslaught. Eric's body was encased in a thin sheet of ice through which lightning seemed to crackle and pop. They almost appeared to be combined elements, but instead, lightning simply ran through the armor behind the ice. Eric first had to reach the second rank with his ice affinity before he could even begin combining the two elements, mainly because ice couldn't usually conduct electricity. Meanwhile, Emily was surrounded by many small black orbs capable of taking any form she liked. Such was Emily's first spell. As a second-rank arcanist, Emily naturally had 2 glyphs, each with its own spell. While her second spell focused on dominating and enslaving others, her first spell involved conjuring these small black orbs that could take any shape as if they were made of water and had a highly penetrative and even corrosive quality. For the moment, she could conjure only 5 of these. 2 turned into something akin to arrows. Another 2 floated around her for protection, and the final orb began floating protectively above Emma's sphere of roots and thorns. The arrows shot off towards the charging ghouls in different directions and began skewering them under Emily's bloodthirsty laughter. Fuck, that feels good. Finally, I can work out some of my frustrations. Die, die, die. Her concerns were unnecessary, though, as black arrows and a wolf clad in thunder and ice were already cleaning up the remaining number of ghouls while remaining none the worse for wear. Yet, they didn't relax even while killing the last few ghouls, as their master still hadn't shown himself. Suddenly, a strangely hot wind hit Eric in the face even as he plunged his right claw through one of the last ghouls. He frowned. Warm wind? Here. Considering the environment, and neither he nor Emily having affinities that could heat up the air, this naturally piqued his interest. He looked to where the wind came from, but saw nothing and felt no problem with himself. His eyes scanned the battlefield, but Emily seemed fine, and Emma was still inside her protective spell. He pulled his hand out of the unfortunate ghoul, but didn't let his guard down as he remained on high alert. Emily seemed to have noticed nothing as she continued to revel in the slaughter of the last few ghouls. Suddenly, Alora's voice sounded in his head, "Emma." It wasn't so much a concerned cry, as it was simply the quickest way to alert Eric to where he should direct his attention. And it worked like a charm. No sooner had he heard Alora's warning before he turned to face the direction of Emma's protective spell. Yet, before he could even move, he was already too late. The air around the dome of plants shimmered, and in a burst of flame, the vampire man appeared as if out of thin air. His affinity appeared to be fire, while at least one of his runebound skills was related to a mixture of speed and invisibility. The burst of flame turned the dome to ash and destroyed the black orb Emily had left behind. Emma screamed. Luckily, the dome had still prevented Emma from being harmed. But perhaps it was only a temporary reprieve, as the vampire quickly grabbed her neck and held her out in front of him in Eric's direction. "Stop!" he yelled. His earlier bravado was gone as he eyed Emily and Eric with caution. Emma struggled with tears in her mismatched eyes, but she could do nothing. She could barely even breathe with that hand around her throat. Not only am I useless in a fight, but now I can't even keep myself safe while hiding, she thought sadly. However, her fear was quickly replaced by calm despite her desire to free herself. Eric was there, and he would keep her safe. That was the belief that thoroughly ingrained itself in her. Eric stopped in his tracks and growled, "Let her go." He remained calm, however. Before heading into unknown territory, he had naturally taken steps to keep the weakest member of his group safe. He just needed to buy a little time. Meanwhile, Emily killed the last ghouls and finally noticed what was happening. She screamed, "No, Emma!" Corrupted red flickered through her black eyes as she desperately tried to fight the urge to simply charge forward. The effort to control herself made her physically pant. Her eyes overflowed with hatred and malice. "I'll tear you into 1,000 pieces if you hurt her," she screeched. The vampire scoffed. "From how you look at me, I believe you'll do that regardless." He turned his attention to Eric, who looked solemn but otherwise remained calm. "You seem like the more reasonable person to talk to. Here's the deal. You three come with me, and you can all live together on one of the blood farms. Refuse, and I will kill this bitch before using my incendiary displacement ability to disappear. I clearly underestimated you two earlier and make myself no illusions about being able to defeat you. But we have ways of keeping you under control at the farms." Emily's expression became even more crazed while Eric's amber eyes narrowed. Rage was boiling inside him because this vampire dared to threaten someone he cared about and considered his. He grinned maliciously. "I think that should have been long enough." The man scoffed and was about to ask what he was talking about when something changed. Emma's skin under his hand began to glow. Emma's face scrunched up a little as she suddenly felt the Ethereum in her storage being quickly drained. However, she remained calm, her trust in Eric absolute. Things happened fast after that. Mere moments after the vampire man noticed Emma's glowing skin, he began yelling and shaking Emma. "Hey, girl, I don't know what you do, dash." Boom! Before he could finish, the sound of an explosion echoed through the empty streets. A bright flash of light occurred, and a shockwave made everyone's hair flutter while snow and ice blasted in every direction. Screams were in the air, and the vampire was forcefully separated from Emma. The man flew backwards. A look of shock and agony twisted his features as he looked at the stump where his hand used to be. Emma looked a little dazed, but none the worse for wear, seemingly unaffected by the explosion. Yet, her long white hair fluttered as she crumpled to the ground. Eric quickly caught the girl in a princess carry and turned back into human form, while the vampire roared as he crashed through a wall and into the cafe Eric had been having memories about. Emma looked exhausted but otherwise fine. She looked up at Eric, her eyes reflecting a mix of relief and lingering fear. I, I knew you'd save me, sir. What happened, though? I feel empty. Her voice was a whisper filled with shock but also trust. Eric's lips curled into a possessive grin as he looked down at the girl in his arms with concern in his piercing amber eyes. He quickly ensured she was fine before answering her question. Of course, I'd save you. Can't let the best mate I've ever had come to any harm, you know? Although, you mostly have Alora to thank for this one. He explained, during one of the many nights you spent with us, she imprinted a sigil on your body. It activates when an unauthorized person touches you for longer than a few seconds, draws power from your Ethereum storage, and then expends that power in a directed and controlled explosion. As Eric explained Alora's protective measures, Emma's smile returned, not just out of gratitude, but with a hint of awe at the magical foresight that had kept her safe. A small fairy appeared, sitting on his shoulder. Alora lounged back and shrugged nonchalantly. Yeah, but I probably wouldn't have thought to do it if this bleeding heart over here didn't ask me to. Emma giggled, and her mouth split into an even wider smile, so bright it could blind gods. Even so, thank you, Miss Alora. You are amazing. Alora snorted and disappeared into Eric's soul again. However, Eric was momentarily stunned because he could feel a little embarrassment from Alora. But that was only possible if she cared what Emma thought. Alora, did you just get embarrassed? He asked mischievously through their connection. The answer he got was immediate. Shut up. That girl plays unfair. Go deal with that vampire man, and be sure to make him suffer. Eric laughed loudly. This was the first time in 7 years Alora had shown any kind of care for people outside of her family, and he loved her thunder attitude about it. Emma was truly an unfair entity in managing to melt even Alora's heart. His laugh quickly ceased again as his face contorted into a severe grin. Right, let's see if we can extract some information from that guy before we torture him to death. He said out loud. Because of her kind nature, Emma was a little taken aback as her face showed some light struggle. She had always known Eric was not particularly concerned with morality, but this was the first time she was confronted with it so clearly. But it took mere moments before she sighed. You've suffered enough over the years, Emma. Stop worrying about other people and let yourself be happy. Besides, if Sir thinks he deserves it, it must be true. She thought to herself, so she nodded with a calm smile. Her acceptance was less because that vampire had just threatened her, and more because the idea that Eric could be wrong in his actions simply seemed foreign to her. Yet, it appeared he was already too late. Agonizing screams echoed from inside the building the man had crashed into. Emma's face showed panic. Eric looked around and noticed Emily was missing. He sighed with exasperation. Now I have to stop this girl before she kills the guy. Emma's expression quickly morphed to understanding before becoming sadness as she realized what was happening. Eric quickly walked towards the hole the vampire had crashed through and tried to put Emma down, but she stopped him. Wait, I know what's going on in there and that you think I won't want to see it, but I do. Whatever Emily is now, she's still my sister, and I should know what she is like. Eric looked a little surprised, but felt mostly respect for Emma. He liked her, but before now, he still thought she was perhaps a little too soft. Now, he reconsidered that thought, although he still suspected she wasn't ready to see the new Emily. But he had no time to argue with her, so he stepped through the wall and looked around. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and neglect. The once cozy interior was now a shadow of its former self, with mold creeping up the walls and furniture in disrepair. The vampire man was hanging from a wall, cornered, desperate, and exuding a mix of fear and defiance. His left arm, now missing a hand, was hanging loosely on his side, while his remaining hand was hanging by a pitch-black chain. A sizzling sound came from his wrist, and smoke rose up from it as if it was slowly eating through his flesh. He screamed in agony. In front of him was Emily, with a crazed expression and a corrupted red flickering through her eyes. You thought you could harm my little sister and get away with it? Suffer for your ignorance, you disgusting bloodsucker, she said viciously, while 3 of her 5 orbs of darkness had been merged to create that chain. The last two had formed themselves around Emily's hands into terrifying claws of darkness. She laughed as she plunged those claws into various body parts and left them there momentarily, so their corrosive nature could slowly eat away the flesh and cause immense pain. Emma covered her mouth, and tears appeared in her eyes, while Eric shook his head in exasperation. "She really needs to control herself," he mumbled. The man kept screaming until he suddenly yelled, "Enough!" Fire red runes appeared on his skin while heat was expelled from his body, causing Emily to stagger backwards. Alora didn't even have to warn Eric, who had, luckily, already put Emma on her own 2 feet. He immediately activated his second lightning rune, Lightning Flash, allowing him to move short distances at near instantaneous speeds, so long as he had spent some time charging it during a fight. Naturally, the ghouls had provided that opportunity. He flashed and appeared next to the man, acting as Alora's ride, who instantly appeared and pressed a dark green magic circle against the vampire's sternum. The same symbol that had appeared on Liam's chest back in London appeared again, and the fire-red runes quickly disappeared. While this all seemed relatively straightforward, it really wasn't. If the man wasn't so distracted and in pain, he could have avoided Alora or at least resisted the seal. Not that the fairy was in any danger, as Eric was right next to her and would have saved her if something went wrong. But it went off without a hitch. The vampire staggered. What? What did you do? Why can't I displace myself?" The fairy grinned deviously. "Because I blocked the power flow towards your runes." She sighed exaggeratedly. "It's actually a little annoying to do with you, rune-bound people, as the power is all through your body. Not to mention that I can't even do anything about your strength. All I can do is stop you from using your skills. It's so much easier with Arcanists, where I just plug up their Ethereum storage, and that's basically it for them." The man was still panicking and barely even listening to her explanation. He tried to run, but setting aside his heavily wounded body, Eric was right next to him. He quickly grabbed the vampire by his neck and tossed him on the ground. You're not going anywhere, buddy. We want information." The man's face contorted and dripped with venom. "Screw you, you disgusting dog. I'm not going to talk. Just wait until the others get here. They must have heard the noise by now." Eric's lips curled into a grin. "We don't need you to talk. We have our own methods." While Alora could read memories and take control of others, she needed an opening or a wounded soul to do so. And this man had neither. Luckily, they had someone in their group who had a much more forceful method. Eric glanced towards Emily. However, when he noticed what she was trying to do, he cursed inwardly and tried to stop her. But it was too late. Emily laughed maniacally and sank her darkness-covered claws into the vampire's left leg, used their corrosive aspect to eat through its rune-bound resilience, and under the man's agonizing screams, Eric's exasperated sigh, Alora's chuckle, and Emma's horrified gasp, ripped it off him. Confronted for the first time with her big sister's corrupted brutality, Emma covered her mouth and sank to her knees as she trembled. Emily," she whimpered. Meanwhile, Emily noticed none of her little sister's struggles. Under the vampire's agonized screams, she prepared to continue torturing the man as if having lost all connection to the outside world. More and more corrupted red flickers appeared in her eyes. Naturally, Eric could not allow this. Setting aside that he didn't want Emily to lose herself, he also needed more answers from the man who was already not long for this world, judging by the blood flowing from his leg. "Oh no, you don't," he growled. Before Emily could sink her claws into the vampire again, he grabbed her by the throat and pulled her up with one hand while quickly immobilizing her arms with the other. Emily struggled and screeched, "Let me go. I'm going to kill him." Slowly, but it was useless. Eric was far too strong for her. He frowned as his piercing amber eyes locked onto Emily's black and red ones. Unlike 2 weeks ago, when he at least still saw a struggle in her eyes, he didn't notice any of that now. She seemed all too ready to lose herself to hatred. It didn't appear like Emily had learned much control over the past 2 weeks. Perhaps it was time for him to take a more direct hand in helping Emily control herself. But first, he had to deal with the current situation. "Calm down," he said in an authoritative tone of voice. The symbol on Emily's hand flashed, and like magic, unsurprisingly, the covenant kicked in and forcibly calmed Emily down, just as it happened on the boat a few weeks ago. The corrupted red disappeared, and soon, her eyes were once again like pools of midnight. Her face went slack, and her struggling ceased. The first thing Emily noticed when she got her senses back was the sound of Emma's whimpering and slight sobbing. She quickly remembered what she had just done and realized why Emma was upset. Her eyes went wide, and she began to struggle again, trying to turn her head towards her little sister. "No, Emma," but Eric still had his hand around her throat and wouldn't let her. He snapped his fingers in front of her face. "Hey, focus here. You can explain yourself to Emma in a moment. First, thanks to you, we have limited time with this guy." He pointed downwards, "So quickly enslave him and tell him to answer my questions." Emily gulped as she saw the anger directed at her in Eric's eyes. She knew she had screwed up, so she nodded meekly, causing Eric to let her go. Emily turned towards the groaning man on the floor who was close to fainting and felt intense hatred and anger burning below her own surface. Yet, Eric's order to calm down still affected her, so she had no change in expression. It was a strange feeling, but not a feeling she hated. She felt more in control of herself than she had in a long time, except when Eric did this to her before. She knew she shouldn't like this. It was not really her control, after all. It was Eric's. And yet, she did like it. But before she could think more about what this meant, she focused on the vampire man instead. A black magic circle appeared on her hand, and she bent down to force a connection between her and him. Soon, the man's eyes went a little dazed, but after hearing Emily's order to answer Eric's questions, he focused on him. After she was done, she quickly turned to Emma. She felt like a knife had stabbed her heart when she saw Emma's kneeling position, wide-open eyes, and terrified expression. Emily took an uncertain step in her sister's direction. "Emma, but her heart nearly broke when she saw Emma scramble backwards a little, fear in her eyes. No matter what may have happened since then, the way Emily treated her during the last few years still left a scar on Emma's mind. And in Emma's eyes, it was the Emily she had grown so scared of over the years that now approached her. Seeing this interaction, Eric sighed. He looked over at Alora, who had been looking at all this with a half-smile and a curious twinkle. Clearly, if she had some popcorn and a chair, she'd be lounging back as if watching a drama show. Eric waved his hand towards the now quiet but still quickly dying man on the floor. "Alora, could you please?" Alora knew what he wanted and rolled her eyes. "That damn bleeding heart of yours." But she still did what he asked by stomping her foot on the vampire's bum leg and sending healing energies into him, quickly stifling the blood flow. If the man still had his own mind, he would have surely groaned heavily from Alora's treatment. Her healing wasn't nearly as good as Emma's would be in the future, but it still bought them some time. Using this time, Eric turned towards the Ashcroft sisters, who were now awkwardly looking at each other from a distance. Emma with fear and apprehension, Emily with sadness and regret. Emily stood while Emma sat and hugged her knees. They both trembled a little. He stepped closer to Emma, who didn't take her eyes off Emily, but quickly latched onto him despite the cold black armor he was wearing. "Yes, sir, she dashed." Eric crouched down and patted Emma's head with a caring look in his eyes. "I know, Emma, but I'm here. You know nothing will happen to you." His patting and words quickly calmed Emma down. She looked up at Eric with somewhat terrifying amounts of trust. She smiled. "I know, sir." Eric nodded. "Good. Now listen. I tried to keep you out of this situation, but you refused. You wanted to see what effects the corruption still had on your sister. Well, here it is. Are you going to run away now? Are you going to ruin what little chance your relationship with your sister still has because you decided to see something you couldn't handle?" Emma opened and closed her mouth a few times. His words seemed to have reached her, but she still seemed uncertain, and fear quickly returned to her gaze when she glanced at Emily. Eric pushed on. "Think about your years in London when Emily was corrupted. She mistreated you, tied you up against your will, and fed you barely enough to survive. But did she ever hit you? Physically hurt you in any way?" Emma hesitated, but eventually shook her head. "No, Eric nodded, right? She wouldn't do that to you because even in her corrupted state, all she wants is your safety. Do you really think she would harm you now? Emma looked at the floor. And no. She looked back up at Eric with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry for being so weak, sir. For constantly needing your help. Whether she was referring to the fight, her capture, her fear of Emily, or all of the above was uncertain. She tried to steal her gaze. I'll try to be better in the future. Eric cracked a reassuring smile. Don't worry too much about it. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. You may not be a fighter, but trust me, you have plenty of power, all your own. As he said that, he thought about Alora's slowly increasing care for the girl and grinned. Emma now looked at Emily more bravely and seemed ready to talk. Eric stood up and walked towards Emily. Tears were in her eyes as she looked at Eric with immense gratitude. Thank you. But Eric ignored her words and gave her a harsh look. Listen closely. Today you fucked up, and I'm unwilling to wait and see if it happens again. You are clearly failing to control your corruption, so I'm going to help you. But first, the moment we find a place to rest, I will be punishing you for your actions today. Then, I will begin to teach you some much-needed discipline. Understood? Despite his harsh words and her previous aversion to Eric's control, Emily's face still overflowed with gratitude over his words to Emma, and she quickly nodded. Why, yeah, absolutely. Eric nodded contently. Good. Now go make up with Emma. Before Emily could run off, however, he stopped her. One more thing. It's time to tell her we didn't manage to remove all of your corruption. At some point, simply saying your behavior is a leftover scar becomes unfeasible. Emily's face turned sad and unwilling, but she nodded anyway. I know. Eric nodded again. Good. Go. Emily walked with a hesitating gait toward her sister, sat down in front of her, and hugged her knees in the same manner Emma was doing. It was time for a difficult conversation. Eric had no time to listen to them, however. He turned to face a dying vampire and an impatient Alora, ready to get a few answers about exactly what the situation was in his old homeland. When Eric arrived by Alora's side, she scoffed at him. Finally done dealing with the kids while you left me to keep this asshole alive? Eric chuckled and took Alora in his arms before kissing her deeply despite the mutilated vampire at their feet. Alora tried to continue acting mad, but quickly giggled and responded in kind. She greedily drank Eric's saliva, which she had personally made as delicious as she could, while making it only a little bit addictive. When they separated, lust burned in her eyes, and she grinned. How dare you use my own work against me? You know I can't stay mad when you kiss me like that. Eric grinned back and caressed Alora's crimson hair. Don't pretend you're actually angry, my wicked little ember. We both know you heard what I said to Emily. If I check a certain part of your body, I'm willing to bet it's dripping in anticipation of punishing her and teaching her some discipline. Alora gasped, exaggeratingly. My love, how dare you suggest such an absolutely true thing? Because I know what you like, he chuckled in response. Despite their equal partnership, Alora loved giving up control to Eric in the bedroom. But she also loved reminding other women that she was second in command. So she grinned with lust in her eyes. Of course you do. If you didn't, that would have meant I chose poorly 7 years ago. And I don't do anything poorly. Anyway, before this gets any further, let's just see what this vampire has to say. I can't keep him alive forever. Eric nodded, and with a last quick peck on Alora's lips, he crouched down and turned his attention back to the vampire, his demeanor shifting from tender to resolute as he looked at the empty-eyed vampire, still controlled by Emily's spell. First question, he started. Have you heard of or seen a human woman by the name of Etta? About 1.8 m tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, freckles, athletic, yet voluptuous? The man mechanically shook his head and spoke in a strained voice. Clearly, his wounds still affected him, even while enslaved. The only humans left in Lord Sigurd's territory are part of his personal blood bank or harem, depending on their gender and appearance. No such woman is among them. Eric sighed. I didn't think it would be that easy, but it would have been nice, he thought. His eyes flared. I just hope the awakening or something else hasn't robbed me of the chance to get my revenge. He didn't like to think about it, but he knew that, technically, it was possible Etta simply died during or after the awakening, and his revenge was already impossible. Luckily, he had only just arrived, and even if he couldn't find Etta here, he still had a lead from that mysterious voice in his dream telling him to find Etta in Africa. He turned his attention back to the vampire. Despite 7 years having passed and not even really being sure what he expected to hear, his next question made him a little anxious. "What do you know of the village of Frostvik?" Elora noticed his slight distress and looked down at the bloody stump she had been treating. She had pretty much done what she could at this point. The man would soon die, and whatever few seconds she could still extend his life by continuing to use her magic was not worth the emotional support she could be providing Eric instead. So, Elora shrunk down and took place on his shoulder while caressing his cheek. If anyone who only knew of Elora's uncaring and mischievous side saw this gesture, they would likely spit blood. The vampire seemed to think for a moment, increasing Eric's anxiousness, but eventually answered, "Frostvik was one of the villages wiped out in the pre-awakening cullings. It hasn't been significant since." Eric closed his eyes. The cold, matter-of-fact tone of the vampire's voice offered no solace. Each word was a stark reminder of the brutal reality of what had happened to Frostvik. Somehow, he had still hoped to hear some survivors. But he knew he shouldn't have expected anything. He sighed and hardened his heart. But before he could start on more general questions, Elora frowned. "What do you mean, one of the villages? Are you saying this happened in multiple places?" Eric blinked. Preoccupied as he was, he hadn't even noticed that detail. He perked up his ears, waiting for the answer. The man nodded. Many villages, both vampire and shapeshifter, were targeted simultaneously that night, all betrayed from within, all by humans who were originally adopted as babies. Despite his otherwise emotionless behavior, the man scoffed with hatred in an almost instinctual reaction. That is why humans were mostly wiped out in revenge after the awakening. After learning this new information, Eric fell silent while Elora mumbled, "Sounds like a coordinated and simultaneous strike that had been years in the making." Still, when they noticed the vampire man's consciousness slowly sinking away, they quickly decided to think more about the consequences of that revelation later and began asking more general questions. After a few more mechanically voiced answers, Erica and Elora got a clearer image of what they were dealing with. Sigurd Blackthorn was a third-rank vampire and ruled a territory he referred to as the Nocturne Dominion, a grandiose name for a relatively minor power that barely stretched beyond the county of Finnmark. Minor, that is, compared to a significant power like the Council. Locally, the ND was the strongest organized power and was still slowly expanding its borders. The only thing impeding their growth was a faction of shapeshifters calling themselves the Silver Enclave, led by a third-rank werewolf named Frostfawn. When he heard the faction name, Eric smiled sadly. Silver was a nickname from his youth, based on his silver-gray hair and fur. But naturally, this Silver Enclave would have a different reason for that name. Until a few months ago, the Enclave and Dominion were equal in power and in a Cold War state, where they both tried to overpower the other before going into total war. But everything changed when the vampires gained a second, third-rank vampire. Yet, not because of the reasons one might suspect. This second vampire was Sigurd Blackthorn, who immediately betrayed his former lord instead of using the new power imbalance to crush the Enclave. Exactly how this went down was unknown, even to Eric's captive vampire. Still, the fact was, one day, Sigurd Blackthorn became the new lord, and the old one disappeared. No one dared ask questions because no one had the power to survive the new lord's wrath. But the moment Sigurd took over marked a dark turn for both the Enclave and the Dominion. Apparently, Sigurd had been trying to convince the former lord of some rather extreme methods, but always failed to do so. Yet, now that he was lord, he had all the freedom in the world. It was at his orders that many first-rank vampires were to be starved into becoming ghouls. The Dominion had always had more vampires than the Enclave had shapeshifters, but the vampires were never at their strongest because there simply wasn't enough blood for everyone. Sigurd changed all that. With many of them suddenly becoming ghouls, the remaining vampires had all the blood they needed to remain in peak condition, while the ghouls didn't need blood to be powerful, just their reason and critical thinking. As for how the ghouls were controlled, no one was entirely sure. Sigurd had a small number of confidants who took care of this, but Eric and Alora's captive was not one of them. Though, for what the man did know, Alora quickly deduced that Sigurd was likely using some sort of sigil, created to control the minds of beasts, which a ghoul essentially was. Sigurd's cruel methods not only led to a vastly more powerful dominion, but also to much more stability in his territory, as all people living in the dominion were now either imprisoned in blood farms, mind-controlled ghouls, or terrified/complicit vampires. It took a little while to create enough ghouls, but eventually, Sigurd's new soldiers and their controllers took to the fields and quickly began defeating the Enclave at every turn, driving them deeper and deeper into desperation. According to the enslaved vampire, the Enclave was barely holding on and would soon be finished off. Eric and Alora listened to all this to better understand their surroundings, but they didn't particularly care. Eric may be a shapeshifter, but he had no interest in going up against a third rank, and who knew how many second ranks just because of that. He had other things to focus on. According to the vampire, the Enclave was even more brutal towards humans than the Dominion and simply killed them all on sight. So the chance that Edda was still alive somewhere in this region had just dropped to near zero. As he set foot on the familiar docks of Kirkens, Eric couldn't escape the raw emotions conjured by these memories. The town that once symbolized innocent joy now stood as a backdrop to a betrayal that had cost him everything. His fists clenched involuntarily. Despite the 7 years that had gone by, his past was an unyielding specter. Now, amidst the remnants of civilization, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking back into the heart of his deepest wounds. There was a reason he almost ran off without even thinking when he realized they were on Earth. He was eager to put it all behind him. But for that, he first had to find Edda and pay respects to the fallen. He didn't make himself any illusions about being able to find bodies after all this time. But perhaps he could still make a symbolic grave in memory of his parents. He was pulled out of his thoughts by 2 small hands that encircled his left fist. He looked beside him with some surprise, but his expression quickly softened when he looked at Emma's encouraging smile. "I don't know why we're here, but you seem distressed. No matter what happened in the past, you're not alone now. Please let me help however I can." It was true. Eric had never mentioned the reason for their travel to Kirkens. Yet Emma had never asked, happy to just follow along. Meanwhile, Emily had been too preoccupied with other things. Alora appeared on the other side and grabbed his right hand. Yet instead of an encouraging smile, there was a playful smirk. "Honestly, that girl is much too sweet. I hate it. Yet, it's almost impossible not to like her. Truly, it's a conundrum. I almost find myself hoping she'll pass the test." Eric could feel the concern and support flowing through their bond, despite her actions and words. Meanwhile, he couldn't help but smirk at Alora's mention of her test. He had to admit he was curious about the results. So far, no one had passed, but he really liked Emma. Putting those concerns aside for later, he unclenched his fists and took Emma and Alora's hands before turning to the white-haired girl on his left with a smile. "I used to live not far from here before the awakening. We've come to pay a visit." Emma looked at the surroundings in wonder. "Sir was born here?" Eric smiled at the curiosity in her voice before shrugging. "Not in this town exactly, but somewhere near here." "I see," Emma mumbled. Then she blushed a little. "I'm actually a little surprised. At some point, I had this weird idea that you and Miss Alora were from some other world or planet. It wasn't exactly a strange thought. They knew a lot about magic, but very little about the current Earth, and Alora was either not human or had gone through some bizarre mutations." Still, Eric's lips curled up, and he patted Emma's head. "That intuition of yours is truly terrifying." It wasn't time for a big reveal just yet, though. So he continued, "We'll tell you about our past someday." Meanwhile, Emily had joined them as well. However, she remained silent and avoided looking into Eric's eyes. Ever since Emma had poured her heart out to her big sister, Emily had tried to avoid him as much as possible, and he had let her. He knew Emily needed some time, to figure out her own emotions and desires now that she was no longer controlled by her corruption and had been told in no uncertain terms that Emma didn't want her protection anymore. Nodding to Emily in greeting, Eric turned towards the town. He began walking over the wooden pier with Emma and Emily in tow, while Alora shrunk down and sat on Eric's shoulder. They were all wearing the outfits they had left London with since they didn't have the time to pack much else back then. Luckily, that simply provided Eric another chance to teach them a lesson in Ethereum usage and control by having them clean their clothes with it. Eric was in his standard black armor, and Alora was in her usual corset and skirt as well, although hers was simply conjured by magic and could be whatever she wanted it to be. Emily still had a black crop top and edgy cargo pants with chains, and lastly, Emma wore her maid outfit. Kirkins resembled a frigid ghost town with the remnants of a once active port now entombed in a layer of snow and ice. Skeletal structures of various offices and warehouses, covered in a white blanket, loomed overhead. They were marred by signs of destruction, but not only by earthquakes. Several buildings had scorch marks, while others had clearly man-made holes. Everything appeared in a state of disrepair and abandonment. It seemed apparent that no one had been here in a long time, yet something was strange. Emily mumbled, more to herself than the rest of the group. Where are all the bodies? While there was snow, it wasn't deep enough to hide anything. After all, despite the temperatures becoming more extreme on Earth, it was still summer, and they were only in a subarctic climate, so most of the time, they remained above the freezing point. Eric and Alora nodded at her words. Eric answered, "Good question. There's clearly been fighting here, but no bodies. I guess it's possible the survivors wanted to bury their friends and allies, but why would they remove the bodies of whoever they were fighting with as well? It might make sense if they were going to stay here, but this place seems abandoned. Speaking of which, where are the survivors? I assume they fought over control of this town, but then why not stay?" The others remained quiet, and his questions went unanswered, as they had no idea either. They walked deeper into town, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the light snow. Occasionally, a gust of wind would send loose snow dancing through the air. The eerie silence was only broken by the occasional creaking of a loose sign or the distant howl of the wind, making Emma and Emily jump up a little. Meanwhile, Eric was a little lost in memories, and Elora looked around from atop Eric's shoulder, frowning as if searching for something. As they ventured further, the buildings closed in around them. Once bustling shops and cafes stood frozen in time, their shattered windows telling tales of the chaos that had unfolded here in the past. A rusty swing creaked in the breeze at a desolate playground, and abandoned vehicles, both large and small, were half buried in snowbanks, silent witnesses to the town's abrupt abandonment. They all kept quiet as they felt the weight of the past press down on them. Even Alora looked solemn and alert. Sometimes, her eyes would suddenly dart to a spot and squint before looking away again. Still lost in memories, Eric noticed a cafe where he, his father, and Etta would eat lunch when they came for supplies. He could see himself laughing and smiling, but found the memory bitter. His father's name was Leifer, and he had always been a kind and peaceful man. In fact, back then, many people would say Eric took after him the most. His mother, Runa, on the other hand, was bolder and enjoyed challenging Eric in various ways, perhaps hoping to pull him out of his passivity. Eric knew she loved his father, but clearly she wanted her son to be a little more energetic and adventurous, likely so she could have more in common with him. Thinking about his mother made Eric smile. While he didn't always get along with her in the past, he loved her like no other because he could always see the overflowing fondness and passion in her eyes. With that in mind, the only thing left to do in Finnmark was to head for the ruins of Frostvik, pay respects, and erect a few fake graves for his parents and other people he cared about. The question was, would it be that simple? While Alora and Eric were absorbed in their interrogation, Emma and Emily sat awkwardly across from each other. They hugged their knees close as they sat engulfed in heavy silence, punctuated only by the sounds of the interrogation. Fear shimmered in both their eyes. Emma's eyes held a wariness born of what Emily might do, reflecting past mistreatment and present events. Emily's gaze, in contrast, was clouded with the terror of potentially losing Emma forever, a prospect that seemed to hollow her out from within. Emily opened her mouth, and the voice of a desperate woman came out. I'd never hurt you, Emma. Not in any way when I'm myself, but even when I'm not entirely myself, I'd never do anything like what I just did to you. Please believe me. At the mention of the violence, Emma involuntarily shivered, her body recoiling as if the blood splatter and the gruesome sounds of Emily tearing off the vampire's leg were happening all over again. This involuntary reaction was like a physical blow to Emily, her eyes welling up with tears that shimmered in the dim light, each one a silent testament to her pain and regret. Emma averted her gaze. I know. Somewhere inside, I know that. It's just hard to really trust you again after all these years. Emily nodded, a sad understanding dawning in her tear-filled eyes. She seemed to shrink in on herself, physically embodying her helplessness and longing. I just wish we could go back to the way things were. Despite our age difference, I always loved to watch movies or play with you, she mumbled, her voice barely audible. A small, nostalgic smile flickered across Emma's face, her eyes gaining a distant, glazed look as if peering through a mist back into a past untainted by the present shadows. I miss the days when we played together, too. For a brief, fleeting moment, they both were adrift in their shared memories, lost in a sea of what once was a past filled with innocent laughter and carefree days, now seeming like echoes from another life. Afterwards, Emma closed her eyes and took a deep breath while clenching and unclenching her fists a few times. She was trying to summon all her courage through an inner monologue. I promised her I'd try to be better in the future. Well, that may have been a few moments ago, but the future is now. Be brave, or forever remain a weak little girl. The past is in the past, but the future can only become what I want it to be if I confront my fear. Right now, at this moment, only bravery can pave a path forward. You want to make her proud? You want to get close to your sister again? Then take the first step. She tried to think of the best next action to take. The answer came to her surprisingly quickly, thanks to the memories that had surfaced just before in the form of a movie she had often seen together with Emily. The movie, and especially the iconic song associated with it, was actually surprisingly reminiscent of their current situation. She opened her mismatched eyes, showing steely determination in her gaze, before suddenly standing up and walking towards the ruined cafe's hole in the wall. Seeing this, Emily panicked and scrambled to her feet. W8. I dash. But before she could continue, Emma had reached the hole and looked out over the snow-covered street while asking a question. We can't change or return to the past, but perhaps we can build something new, starting with a snowman. Before Emily could answer, the younger sister began singing. Her voice was beautiful, haunting and sad, yet also full of hope. Her maid dress and long white hair, while standing in the cold light of the sun, made her look enchanting. It was about two sisters who used to play all the time, but now grew apart for reasons the little sister didn't fully understand. The little sister wanted to be let in, to understand what was going on with her big sister, to play and grow close with her again. Emily widened her eyes as tears streamed down. The fact was, ever since the corruption's direct hold on her had been broken back in London, she and Emma had never really had a serious conversation. Sure, they danced around it a little, said some platitudes perhaps, and then there was Emma's heartfelt speech back on the boat, but that was all. Ultimately, Emily was too scared of herself, so she lied to Emma about how much the corruption still affected her. On the other hand, Emma had more trouble letting go of the past than she pretended. Meanwhile, they were both wrecked with guilt, Emily because of her actions, and Emma because she was the one to give her sister that book. But while none of these issues had really gone away, Emily recognized what Emma was doing. This was an open hand, a new beginning, a proposal to play like they did when they were younger and to begin working out their issues together. Emily wasted no time in grabbing that hand. When Emma was done singing, she stood beside her little sister and said, tears streaming down her face, I'd love to build a snowman with you. And so they did. They walked out onto the snow-covered street of this abandoned, post-apocalyptic ruin of a town and began to make a snowman. Naturally, they moved a little to the side of the bloody battlefield and ghoul corpses. While they worked, Emily told Emma everything about how the corruption had only loosened its hold on her, but was always there in the background, waiting for her to slip up. Emma listened patiently, and when her big sister was done, she began to talk about her own experiences during the last 7 years and now in the previous few weeks with Eric. They talked about everything and anything, and in the end, they hugged while standing next to the snowman. They naturally didn't have a carrot or a smoking pipe, but they made do with what they could find amongst the rubble. There was an orange piece of piping for the nose and some misshapen pieces of bricks for the smile and eyes. It didn't look like much, but that wasn't the point of this. Instead, it was a symbol of their new beginning. The fear, lack of trust, and guilt were all still there. But at least now, they had a foundation upon which to rebuild their relationship. Besides, no matter what, they still loved each other. Emma smiled confidently. "Don't you worry, Big M. I'm going to work hard and grow stronger so that I can soon burn away all that corruption in your soul, and you can be free again." Emily sniffled a little and nodded. "I know you will, little Em. Just please promise me you won't try to grow too fast. I would never forgive myself if you ended up being the one corrupted instead." "Don't worry, Big M. I already made that promise to Sir," she answered. It was then that their lovely reconciliation was interrupted by the sound of a sickening crunch just before Eric walked out of the cafe with Alora on his shoulder and blood and gore on one of his feet, signifying the ignoble end the vampire man had suffered. When he noticed the sisters hugging, he smiled genuinely. "I'm glad to see you two made up." Then his face became stern. "We have to leave now, though." Although that vampire lied about his friends being close enough to hear the sounds of fighting, it still won't be too long before they come to check what happened to him. The girls broke up their hug, and Emma smiled brightly at Eric. "Yes, sir," while Emily looked a little unsure how to act suddenly. Instead of figuring it out, she asked, "What about the boat, though? It won't remain invisible without us there to power it, right?" It was Alora who answered, apparently wanting to give Emily another lesson in sigil crafting. As it turned out, the sigils on the boat could also use Ethereum from the environment, just not as efficiently. This means the sigils can't absorb Ethereum from the surroundings fast enough to keep the invisibility going. But during their 2-week journey, all the required energy came from the 4 of them, while the Ethereum from the surroundings was stored for later use. Like right now, using a combination of the stored Ethereum and continued absorption, the boat should be capable of remaining invisible for at least a few weeks. But even if these people discovered it, so what? It's not like there weren't other ships in the harbor. And frankly, what would these vampires want with their boat, anyway? After Alora was done explaining, they prepared to leave, which included collecting the tough and sharp ghoul claws. Never knew when those might come in handy. Before they left, however, the fairy whispered an idea in Eric's ear. It was a little manipulative, as one might have come to expect from her, but Eric smiled, as he didn't see any harm in it. Under the surprised gazes of Emma and Emily, he walked towards the snowman they built and put his hand on it. Slowly, it began to be encased in a thin layer of ice. He didn't use any skill or spell, just fine Ethereum control and ice affinity. When it was done, he smiled a little crookedly there. "No wind, rain, or even first-rank asshole will be able to affect it now." The girls looked at him with gratitude. Emily made almost a 180-degree turn compared to London and the boat trip since the events in that cafe, as she looked at him with many complicated emotions that she had to sort through. Meanwhile, Alora snickered a little, setting aside the added positive emotions that Emily would now feel for Eric. This action would also subtly create the unconscious thought in Emily and Emma's minds that Eric was the pillar holding up their own lives and relationship, increasing their reliance on him. When all was done, they turned towards the open road and began to head for Frosvik. After leaving Kirkins, they traveled quickly, or as quickly as they could, considering there were 2 humans in the group. The world of Arcanists offered many rapid modes of travel, but these were out of reach for a first and second rank, such as the sisters. Their Ethereum could only rejuvenate their tired muscles and mind so they could endure the long trek. Sometimes, Eric would carry one or both of the sisters if they encountered particularly difficult terrain or the girls simply became too tired. Often doing this in werewolf form, his supernatural strength would navigate the rugged landscape with effortless grace, even as one sister clung to his neck and the other lay in his arms. They traveled like this for at least 12 hours across various beautiful frozen landscapes, lakes, rivers, and taiga forests. Emma, particularly, was enchanted by the sights of these wilds. Her eyes would often light up at the frozen wonders around them. They didn't travel along any well-established roads, as they might encounter more so-called ghoul patrols from the Dominion that way. Instead, they stayed on the more rugged hiking paths. They encountered a few mutated animals, some aggressive and some less so, but none dangerous. Any that attacked them were mere first rank and quickly dispatched by either Emily or Eric. Eventually, they came across an isolated log cabin. At this point, it was already past midnight, and Emma looked a little haggard as she turned a pair of beautiful, pleading eyes in Eric's direction, who sighed and relented. It's not like he was in any serious hurry. Not to mention that this might be an excellent opportunity to do what he had planned for Emily. They entered the cabin to find it covered in thick layers of dust and occupied by two frozen corpses. Likely humans who, even after becoming arcanists, couldn't handle the increased cold during winter. Emma looked a little sad, but Eric was not going to take the time it took to bury the unfortunate souls. So he dumped them outside and gave them a cremation burial using his lightning. The cabin itself was small, but looked cozy. It was only a single room with a table, some chairs, a sofa, a two-person bed, a stove, and, of course, a fireplace. Some wood was already prepared there, but had gone unused by the previous occupants, likely unable to create a fire after lighters and matches ran out, and neither of them having an affinity that could be used for such a purpose. Eric, however, was not one such being. None of them really needed the heat, but it would certainly make things more comfortable, so he quickly started a fire with a spark of lightning. Next, Alora created a few sigils to conceal the smoke from their fire, and then a few on the door and windows to protect against intruders and stop any light or sound from escaping. When all that was done, Eric took out some food from the storage in his armor, which he had barely touched over the last few weeks, as those flying fish had been particularly delicious and nutritious. Soon, the three of them were seated around the single table in the cabin, a fire crackling in the hearth, spreading warmth and light. At the same time, they enjoyed the delicious food prepared by Eric. Alora had gone back to Eric's soul for now. Were it not for the realities of the world outside, it would almost seem like the awakening had never happened, and the three of them were a family or group of friends on vacation. There wasn't much conversation, but the happy smile on Emma's face prevented the atmosphere from becoming awkward. When they were done eating, Eric's face grew stern despite his inward excitement. It was time to punish Emily for earlier and teach her some much-needed discipline. Naturally, his method for doing both would be sexually charged, but he couldn't show that on his face. He needed to maintain an air of authority despite his excitement. He truly would be doing this mainly to help Emily. But if she suspected Eric might be doing this for other reasons, she would surely balk. That said, there was simply no reason Eric and Alora couldn't enjoy themselves. Plus, there was something else. He didn't enjoy Emily's currently subdued state much. He liked her spunky attitude. He just needed her to direct her rebellious nature towards others while accepting his leadership. Luckily, he suspected a layer of Emily's personality was hidden behind her attitude and rebellious nature. Something he could use to give her back her confidence while accepting her role as his follower. He turned to Emily, who gulped a little when she noticed his gaze. Today's events had somewhat undermined her usual bravado and confidence when facing him. A spark of dependence on Eric had appeared in her mind, and she found it hard to continue thinking of him as just the guy who woke her up from her corrupted state and kept her out of the council's hands in exchange for her and Emma's servitude. Now, she thought that perhaps this whole deal was not so bad. The question was if she would still think that way after tonight. Eric raised an eyebrow. You know what's going to happen now, right? Emily nodded, some unwillingness showing on her face, but no real defiance. Emma's eyes flickered with concern as she glanced at her sister. But, sir, is this really necessary? Her voice quivered slightly, a testament to her inner turmoil. She was torn between her loyalty to Eric and her protective instinct for Emily. Eric maintained his stern demeanor, addressing Emma with a firm but understanding tone. It's about more than just necessity, Emma. It's about understanding the consequences of actions and making choices. Back in London, Elora and I offered Emily a way to keep her corruption at bay without needing to fight it constantly. But she didn't like the consequences of accepting our help, so she refused and chose to face the corruption on her own terms. I must admit I admired her for that. But now, she has failed to control herself and must face the consequences of her choices. If she doesn't, then today will also be the last time I help to calm her down. Next time she loses control, Elora will simply turn her into a puppet again until we can fully cleanse her. While Elora needed an opening or a damaged soul to take control of someone, the Covenant provided more than enough of an opportunity. Emily's eyes widened slightly at Eric's words, and she regained some of her defiance. What you in that dash, she was doing to say bitch, but remembering what happened last time, she quickly swallowed that word and continued. I mean, what you and Elora offered was slavery. Eric shrugged and, you? Emily released an exasperated sigh and deflated a little. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of her still screamed to resist and maintain her defiant stance, but another part was worn down by recent failures and a feeling of dependence on Eric. The fact was, she couldn't afford to lose his help in the future. After trying and failing twice, she didn't really believe she could control this on her own anymore. So long as magical slavery was off the table, she could at least take responsibility for her actions. With a heavy heart and a sense of resignation, she finally nodded. Fine. I don't like it, but I get it. I can't just expect your help if I'm unwilling to face the consequences. So just get it over with. Emma seemed to accept Eric's explanation and certainly didn't want her sister to turn into that lifeless doll again. She turned to Emily with a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Big M. I'll be here with you, no matter what. Besides, you know you can trust Sir, right? Especially after what happened today. Emily closed her eyes and nodded with a sigh. The fact was, she still felt immensely grateful for Eric's actions earlier. He could have just focused on the vampire and left her and Emma to sort things out for themselves, but he didn't. Eric turned to Emma, asking, Are you sure you want to stay? You could simply go to sleep. Elora can make sure you don't wake up. He needed to propose this for the girl's comfort, but he and Elora hoped she would refuse. The more, the merrier, after all. Luckily, Emma shook her head without hesitation and instead, with a determined gaze, proposed something even more interesting. No, what happened today was my fault, too. I should have protected myself better. So, instead of keeping me out of it, I want you to punish me, too. Elora laughed and cheered inside Eric's mind, while Eric himself had to do his utmost to keep a straight face. The sisters didn't even know what he and Elora had in store for them, but they seemed happy to jump in with both feet. Before he could answer, Emily's protective instinct kicked in. She vehemently shook her head. Absolutely not. Emily, that guy was a second-rank runebound with an ability that incorporated both speed and some sort of camouflage. There is nothing you could have done. I deserve whatever punishment he has in mind, and some discipline training might even be good for me, but you don't need or deserve any of that. Emma smiled warmly at her sister, but shook her head. No, Big M. Back in Kirkins, we promised each other to start over. You don't have to protect me from this. No matter what, I will share both responsibility and punishment. Emily opened her mouth to respond, but Eric was first. That's enough. I believe it is still my decision who gets punished. He turned to Emma. If this is what you want, then fine, but it won't lessen Emily's punishment, and since I agree with her that you really couldn't have done much to protect yourself in that situation, your punishment will be much lighter as well. Knowing that, do you still want to go through with this? Emily frowned, but didn't say anything, waiting for Emma's response. Emma seemed saddened that she couldn't lessen Emily's punishment, but still gave a determined nod. I understand, sir. I'd still like to be punished. Once again, suppressing his grin while listening to Alora's cheering. He kept a stern expression and nodded. As you wish, then. But for now, your punishment will only include watching. Your real punishment will start later. Seeing that everyone was now on the same page, Eric stood up. At the same time, Alora appeared next to him with a perverted grin that made Emily a little apprehensive. Clearly, Eric's partner had much less reservation than him about showing her perverted interest in this punishment. The fairy snapped her fingers, and suddenly, a strange device similar to a pillory appeared in front of the couch. This device did not come from the storage in Eric's armor, as it was much too big for that. Instead, it came from the red jewel that adorned Alora's forehead, which was also a storage space, except much larger. Exactly what Alora kept in that thing, not even Eric knew. All he knew for sure was that it held the blood Alora used for infusion and a lot of perverted devices like this one. The device resembled a traditional pillory in its basic form, featuring a slot for the victim's head and 2 openings for the forearms. However, its uniqueness lies in the addition of a robust, horizontally positioned metal bar. This bar was strategically placed, so the prisoner would have to arch over it to position their head and arms into the device. Once secured, the bar would force the hips to remain elevated, even if the captive's legs were to give out. The entire structure was designed to adjust to the height of the individual and the specific pose desired by the captor. The metal bar and the headpiece could be elevated, forcing the prisoner to stand upright with legs fully extended and their back in a horizontal position, or it could be lowered, making the victim kneel while maintaining a horizontal back. However, this pillory's most intriguing and perhaps most menacing feature was its ability to independently adjust the front and back sections to different heights. This functionality allowed for an array of positions, where the prisoner's legs could be either kneeling or fully extended while their upper body was angled upwards or downwards. This versatility meant that the prisoner's head could be placed at various heights, serving whatever purpose the captor intended, from humiliation to easier accessibility for various forms of punishment or other exciting uses. Seeing this thing, Emma's eyes widened and, perhaps unsurprisingly, considering what Eric and Alora had gotten up to lately, sparkled with a bit of interest. Emily, however, panicked and backed away while brief flashes of red appeared in her eyes. Hold on. What the fuck are you intending to do to me? Eric raised an eyebrow. Calm down. What? Do you think I would rape you or something? Surely, we've built up a little more trust than that over the last few weeks. Emma gasped, Big M. He would never do that. Hearing their words, Emily actually felt a little guilty. The corrupted red disappeared from her eyes, and she sighed. Yeah, sorry. I do know that. But that thing looks terrifying. Eric nodded thoughtfully. Of course it does. To you anyway. You're terrified of giving up control after these 7 years, and with good reason. But that is not only why this makes a good punishment, but also why it will serve to build a little trust between us. I won't tell you any more before you actually decide to take the leap and trust me. So, will you go back on your decision to accept punishment, accepting all the consequences that come with that decision, or put yourself in a position of vulnerability? Emily hesitated a moment longer, but seeing the expression of absolute trust in Eric on Emma's face, she sighed, accepted her fate, and began walking towards Alora and the device next to her. Finally, Eric released some excitement and grinned. Good. Meanwhile, Alora mirrored Eric's grin and beckoned Emily with her finger. Good girl. Come to mommy and accept your punishment. Emily couldn't resist a shiver when she heard Alora's taunt. She didn't much trust or like this woman, but from what she had seen, she believed Eric to be capable of reining her in, so she bravely stepped forward, arched over the metal bar to place her head and arms in the pillory, and allowed the fairy to restrain her. After Alora secured Emily while wearing a perverted grin, she also applied a seal to lock Emily's Ethereum storage, providing the maximum possible feeling of vulnerability. Emily was now fully immobilized, her hips forcibly raised by the metal bar, her legs straight while balancing on her toes, and her upper body restrained into a horizontal position. Emily trembled as she had not felt this vulnerable in a long time. Yet, it was only going to get worse. Alora snapped her fingers and caused Emily's clothes to disappear, exposing Emily's pale, tattooed skin to the open air. Her medium-sized breasts defied gravity, remaining firm and close to her body instead of sagging downwards. Next, Alora transformed her own corset and skirt into a black leather dominatrix outfit, complete with a riding crop and high-heeled leather boots. She was standing beside Emily, not behind her, so despite her immobilized state, Emily could still see Alora. Immediately, Emily's conviction faltered. What a dash, Pats. Alora used the riding crop to spank Emily's ass. The time for talking is over now, little pet. Now is the time to take mommy's punishment like a good girl. Wait, I thought it would be dash, Pats. The lusty fairy grinned widely as she caressed Emily's ass with the crop. What did I just say? You'll talk when spoken to and not before. Your master has his own part to play in your punishment. Master? What dash? Pats. Damn it, just least dash. Pats. All right, Jew dash. Pats. This time, Emily grudgingly kept quiet as she noticed the futility of her words. Instead, she just glared at the fairy-turned dominatrix next to her. After waiting a few moments with anticipation shining in her eyes to see if Emily would speak again, she caressed the now slightly red ass of the goth girl. There, isn't it better when you listen to Mommy? Of course, those were only some light taps to ensure you understand your position. The real punishment has yet to start. Annoyance and a little corrupted red flickered in Emily's eyes as she opened her mouth to complain, but reluctantly closed it again when she noticed Alora's excited grin and raised riding crop. Annoyance and corruption soon made way for reluctant acceptance. She sighed inwardly. She knew something like this might happen when she agreed to be punished. Her gaze steeled as she determined to take whatever they wanted to give her without complaint or noise. She refused to give them, or rather, Alora, the satisfaction. She wondered what Eric's role in all this would be as she tried to turn her head as much as possible in his and Emma's direction. What she saw shocked her as Emma was looking at her with an entranced expression while lightly rubbing her thighs together. Emma, you dash. Pats. Shush, little pet. Let the poor girl enjoy herself if she likes. Alora's teasing voice sounded. Emma didn't seem to have heard it, as Eric whispered in her ear. Exciting, isn't it? Would you like to be strapped into that thing someday? Unconvincingly, finally unable to keep his excitement inside, Eric grinned lustfully. There's no need to be ashamed of it, Emma. You enjoy bondage. Many people do. Plus, it's not like Emily is doing this against her will. What's the harm if you enjoy yourself a little? Seeing that Emma was too embarrassed to respond any longer, he chuckled and left Emma to stew in her own thoughts and arousal. He walked closer to the restrained Emily and, with every step, lost a piece of his intimidating black armor. Soon he was standing next to the raven-haired girl entirely in the nude. Alora welcomed him with a smile, but continued to keep an eye on Emily in case she slipped up. Eric let his hand wander over Emily's back while the girl shivered from discomfort. She wasn't used to being this vulnerable and couldn't understand why Emma liked it so much. Emma and Emily had talked about many things while building their snowman back in Kirkins, so Emily was now fully aware of precisely what went on in that bedroom during their boat trip. Eric reached the girl's tight, perky ass and grabbed it roughly, causing Emily to let out a sound that sounded like a combination of a groan and a moan. She wanted to speak up and complain, but Alora was eyeing her constantly, and she didn't want another pointless swat on her bottom. Not for something relatively harmless, anyway. Eric enjoyed Emily's silky smooth skin, kept that way by the etherium nourishing her body, and wandered over her back with his hands while Alora watched. Lust glimmering in her beautiful green eyes. When he had his fill, he gave Emily a hard spank, causing her to yelp, and moved on to sit on the sofa. She glared at him, but continued to remain silent. She promised herself she wouldn't give Alora the satisfaction, and she held to the promise. For now, anyway. Whether she would manage to keep it up was anyone's guess. Eric's 9-inch member was fully erect and challenging the heavens while he slowly stroked himself, making Emily gulp a little. She was unable to take her eyes off it. It wasn't the first time she had seen it, considering how she walked in on him in the bedroom more than once, but it was undoubtedly the first time she had seen it up close. And it looked a lot more intimidating this way. Eric grinned at her behavior, which made his cock even harder. See anything you like? You're allowed to answer direct questions. But Emily remained silent anyway, either not trusting his promise or simply not having anything to say. Eric continued, stroking himself slowly while looking Emily straight in the eye. He simply ignored her silence and continued talking. Would you like to hear what we have in store for you tonight? More silence. Emily just glared at him with defiance glittering in her gaze. She may have submitted herself to punishment, but she wouldn't surrender so easily. Eric sighed. Well, you're right. I was going to tell you anyway. He answered an unasked question. He waved elegantly towards the intimidating Alora. My lovely wife and partner will administer your punishment. You'll have to excuse me, as even I don't know exactly what she has planned for you, but you could trust she won't break any rules. Then he indicated himself. As for me, I'll give you your first lesson in discipline. He grinned at his partner. Alora, if you would. The fairy giggled. With pleasure, dear. She turned to Emily. I hope you enjoy yourself. I work very hard to make his pheromones and scent just right, you know. Confusion flickered through Emily's eyes, but she waited silently. Alora reached over and fiddled with the restraining device when Emily suddenly felt her head move downwards, right towards Eric's cock. She couldn't remain silent this time as panic filled her face. Wait. Why, you promised Dash. Pats. Pats. As punishment for talking, she received 2 hard swats on her bottom while her head kept moving lower. She didn't speak again, but looked up at Eric with pleading, almost fearful eyes. Luckily for her, Eric didn't leave her hanging long. Don't worry. My little friend isn't going anywhere inside you. In fact, your challenge tonight is to resist the temptation of doing exactly that. Momentarily surprised, Emily naturally had the urge to scoff, but before she could, her face was placed right in front of the base of Eric's shaft, and she was suddenly hit with a heady, musky odor that really shouldn't smell good, and yet not only did but also send her head into a tailspin. She was now in a rather uncomfortable position, essentially bowing deeply and with a straight back. Meanwhile, Eric was sagging a little on the sofa, pressing his lower body forward. Emily's entire body began heating up, and suddenly, the urge to lick the thing in front of her jumped into her mind. But she squashed that thought as soon as it came to her. Her eyes showed panic and confusion as she looked up at Eric, who grinned at her as he caressed her hair. See? You can resist your urges, after all. Now, you just need to keep doing it for as long as your punishment lasts. Oh, and if you're wondering about the smell, that's Alora's handiwork. And also your main obstacle in keeping your tongue off my dick. They weren't done tempting her yet, however. After Emily was properly secured and in place, Alora kneeled on the couch, right next to Eric. She licked her lips seductively as she stared at Eric's cock and glanced at Emily with a smirk. Now let Mommy show you what you're missing, little pet. She bent over and gobbled Eric up in one go. She had certainly had enough practice over the years, so taking his entire 9 inches down to the base was as easy as breathing. Eric smiled confidently, put a guiding hand on the back of Alora's head, and leaned back, completely ignoring Emily, who had become nothing more than a spectator to the couple's lovemaking. And it was hard for her not to spectate. She was entranced by the giant meat stick being gobbled up by the short, yet domineering Alora. Emma had told her about some of the things these two got up to, but to see it firsthand was something else. Alora's ministrations caused more and more pheromones to be released as she bobbed up and down while expertly using her tongue to bring Eric as much pleasure as possible. Eric released a pleasured sigh. That's it, my slutty little Ember. No one is as good as you, and continued to pat Alora's hair. But he didn't stay idle either, as he moved his other hand towards Alora's well-rounded bottom and gave it a quick spank, causing Alora to moan and move faster. Next, he slowly snaked his hand further, moved the black leather covering her cave of wonders to the side, and slid 2 fingers into the fairy's ever-so-tight pussy, making her moan even louder. He stuck a third finger into her ass and used his expert knowledge of her most sensitive places to quickly bring his partner closer and closer to orgasm. It didn't take long this way before they both came simultaneously. Alora shook and moaned, but didn't take Eric out of her mouth. Instead, she kept only the tip inside, as she had plans for his spunk and didn't want it shooting too far down. Naturally, Eric knew this and didn't try to push her down, something he knew she would have loved under normal circumstances. Instead, he kept his fingers lodged inside Alora to extend her orgasm and closed his eyes while he enjoyed his own. When they were both done, Alora released Eric. She moaned with an ecstatic expression while she sloshed his cream around in her mouth before turning to Emily with a wicked expression. Emily, who had been lost in a daze of pheromones and perverted interest, blinked and, upon seeing what Alora was about to do, quickly panicked. Dash. But it was exactly this opening that Alora quickly used to press her mouth against Emily and share the prize she had just gotten. Eric watched with glee as Emily's eyes rolled up in pleasure from the delicious taste and concentrated, phenomenal smell. Meanwhile, on the other side of the room, Emma was wholly lost in her own world, having sunk to her knees as she furiously worked her own snatch. It wasn't necessarily Emily's involvement that was doing it for her, as much as it was Emily's situation. Emma had long since gone from hesitant dependence to full-blown kink when it came to bondage. Only when Eric did it, though. Trust was essential. But when Alora pressed her lips on Emily's to share the milk, she couldn't help but snap out of it for a moment to gaze at their interaction with jealousy. She knew that taste all too well and wanted more. She was just too embarrassed to ask. Alora separated from Emily as a string of cum and saliva still connected their mouths. The fairy grinned at their latest victim. Now, what do you say to Mommy and Master for your treat? But Emily was lost in a daze and barely recognized what was happening. All she could think of was that delicious taste in her mouth and how it seemed familiar, despite being sure it was the first time she tasted it. However, that wasn't entirely true, as she had already tasted Eric once before. Only at the time, she was possessed by Alora. But while Emily herself had no recollection of that event, her body did. Eric's intoxicating aroma and taste had made Emily's body want more on a subconscious level that Emily herself didn't realize. Only now was her unknown desire satisfied, and she felt great relief and pleasure because of it. Eric grinned at Emily's confused and pleased face before turning to Alora. I don't think she heard you, dear. His partner chuckled and grabbed the riding crop. Well, then we'll just have to make her listen. Pats. Mommy asked you a question, dear. What do you say to Mommy and Master for your treat? Emily had lost her previous defiance to a combination of pleasure and confusion. Still, despite the painful sting waking her up a little, it was not yet enough. What? Pats. Thank you. Alora immediately patted the girl's head. There's a good girl. Yet, it seemed this last interaction also shocked her out of her confused daze when she shook her head and suddenly seemed to realize what she had just said. Wait. No. What the hell did you just feed me? I feel so hot. Alora grinned. You know perfectly well what that was, little pet. And there's only one place to get more. When she heard those words, Emily trembled and closed her eyes, trying desperately to ignore the urge that was slowly building up inside her as her brain swam in a pink fog of arousal. Eric grinned at Alora's attempts to make Emily give in to temptation. He and Alora had planned this whole thing extensively, but with slightly different goals. Eric was enjoying himself, but his main goal really was to help Emily control her urges. Alora, on the other hand, loved to see women fall to the pleasure Eric could provide through the body she herself modified and hoped Emily would give in. She and Eric actually had a little bet on how this would turn out in the end. A bet with the usual stakes. Either Eric would call Alora Mommy, or Alora would call Eric Master. But only for a week, of course. But for now, it was time to let Emily stew in the smells and tastes for a little while. So Alora got up and stood behind Emily. It was time for the punishment to begin. She smiled and caressed Emily's, but while admiring it. You really have a great ass, Emily. Next, Her smile turned far more sadistic. And I'll greatly enjoy teaching it what happens to disobedient girls who cause trouble. Emily barely paid attention to the words that were said, as she focused all her attention on ignoring the increasing heat and desire that spread through her body. But she certainly noticed what happened next when Alora put away the riding crop and brought her empty hand down on Emily's poor, unprotected ass. Ah! She yelped and likely would have shot up if the contraption she was locked inside had allowed her. Instead, she was forced to remain where she was, breathing in Eric's lust-inducing pheromones while Alora spanked her ass. Naturally, Alora didn't stop at one, but kept going. Meanwhile, Eric just laid back and enjoyed the show. Pats. Ah. Pats. Ah. Pats. Ah. Small tears appeared in Emily's eyes, but rather than pain, a different feeling started spreading through her body. A feeling she tried to deny with everything she could. When she was done, Alora began caressing Emily's red skin and spoke teasingly. What does that feel, Emily? Perhaps I'll go easy on you if you call me Mommy. But Emily didn't answer. She kept her mouth shut tight, while inwardly yelling at herself to not give that woman any satisfaction or give in to this overpowering urge to stick out her tongue and lick that disgusting snake that had once again filled with blood and risen up high. She even shut her eyes tight so she didn't have to look at it constantly. Her defiance only made Alora more excited, as she kept spanking the poor girl's ass with her open hand until it was bright red. But that was when, suddenly, Emily couldn't hold it in anymore and opened her mouth to cry out in pleasure as her body shook and clear liquid squirted from her pretty hole all over Alora's black high heels. Seeing this, Eric looked amused, and Alora actually laughed out loud. Oh my! Alora giggled before turning to Eric. It seems we were right, my love. This little pet enjoys pain. Emma looked at this with wide eyes and was so shocked she even stopped touching herself. While she was envious of Emily's restrained position, she was sure she didn't enjoy pain and couldn't imagine herself coming from getting spanked. Emily had wide eyes and shook her head as much as she could. She surely would have covered her mouth if her hands weren't stuck as much as her head. No, 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 no. This can't be happening. Why is this happening? She mumbled over and over. Eric leaned over, grabbed her chin, and looked into her black eyes. Do you want me to tell you? Lost in confusion and desperate for answers, she nodded her head. Before he spoke, Eric considered his words carefully. This was important. He wanted to help Emily come to terms with herself, not manipulate her. He just needed her to be a little more vulnerable than usual before she could accept his words. It's possible you were always this way and simply hid it away unconsciously. But I don't believe that. I think that spunky, confident, independent woman is the real you. But you've lost something ever since Alora and I woke you up from your corrupted state. You lost confidence in yourself. You fear yourself because of what you might do to Emma if you lose control again. And most of all, you feel guilty. Overwhelmingly guilty over what you did to your little sister over the last 7 years. Now, you probably already realized all that, but what you perhaps didn't know is that these kinds of feelings can often transfer into a form of masochism. You subconsciously think you deserve to be punished, and the relief you feel from getting that subconscious desire satisfied is what just made you come. Having regained some of her senses after that mind-blowing orgasm, Emily blinked. Eric's words struck a chord, and she realized he was right. But she didn't know what to do with that information and looked towards Eric for more answers. Yes, so now what? He grinned. So now we look for solutions. Your fear and guilt are part of the reason you find it so hard to control your corruption. I can't help you resolve those feelings. Only you can do that. But Alora and I can punish you occasionally so that your guilt is satisfied until you can resolve it yourself. As for your fear, let's talk about that after your punishment. I think Alora has an exciting idea on how to continue. Having said what he wanted to say, he leaned back on the sofa to leave Emily with her thoughts while Alora prepared the next part. An evil grin appeared on her face at the same time as a dark green circle appeared on her hand. She touched Emily's body with the circle as she explained what she was doing. Mommy has just locked your orgasms, little pet. For the next hour, I'll be giving you both pain and pleasure, but you won't be allowed to come. If you fail to resist your urges and lick your master's cock during that time, another hour will be added before you're allowed to come. But you can lick him for as much as you like during that time. Understood? Good. Let's begin. Before Emily could say anything, Alora produced an item that looked suspiciously like a vibrator and pushed it against the poor girl's still sensitive clit. Emily couldn't stop herself from screaming. Meanwhile, Eric's cock and its temptations remained right in front of her face the entire time. Eric spent most of this time either enjoying the show or exploring his ice glyph and rune. But in the end, Emily proved her pride and willpower were still intact when, an hour later, she was mostly delirious, yet had still not given in to the tempting smell and taste in front of her. She panted heavily, and the desire to come was burning in her eyes, but she remained quiet, still refusing to give Alora more satisfaction than she already had. The fairy in question stood behind Emily with a pout on her face and various tools in her hands. "Turns out I lost another bet, Master," she said, without any real shame or regret. Calling Eric Master for a week had no impact on her and was just a bit of fun. Eric chuckled happily. "Well, not for a lack of trying, my wicked little ember." He turned to the panting Emily and leaned forward to grab her chin again as he smiled. "Congratulations. You won. You can come a moment, but first, let's talk about your fear." Had he talked to her about this before she was in her current state, she would have likely gotten furious and refused, simply because her personality wouldn't even let her think about it. He needed her to be vulnerable and a little more open. Emily didn't have the strength to answer and could only pant and blink, but Eric could still see the spark of clarity in them. He continued, "I get why you denied our offer of magical slavery back in London, and I doubt you will accept now. Nor do I even want you to, but you do need to accept that I am in charge, and you need to follow. Since you don't have confidence in keeping yourself in control and fear losing it, trust me to do it for you instead. You know I have both the strength to subdue you and the covenant to calm you down. Put your trust in me. Serve me willingly, even without the covenant, and I swear I will never let you go out of control or hurt your sister in any way. Meanwhile, with Emma's help, we will eventually cleanse you completely." Emily forced what little clarity she still had to the surface and panted, "Can I really trust you? And what if I don't want to do any more perverted crap?" Eric had a serious expression on his face. "I swear it on my love for Alora. And I don't joke about that. Plus, Emma trusts me. Surely that gives me some bonus points." Alora smiled happily at his words. She seemed almost like a young wife in love if it weren't for the various sexual torture devices in her hands and the dominatrix outfit she was dressed in. Then again, perhaps that simply depended on the marriage. Losing the seriousness, Eric grinned. "As for the perverted crap, we don't ever have to go further than these punishments, assuming you even want to continue with those as a method to ease your guilt. Our new rules would be the same as those of the covenant. You'll just be doing it willingly rather than feeling forced." Eric and Emily stared at each other for a little while before Emily sighed, the desperate desire to come still present in her voice. Fine. But only you, not Alora." Despite Alora's pout, Eric smirked and nodded. "That's fine. Now seal our new deal by asking me to let you come." Just because he mostly did this to help her didn't mean he also didn't immensely enjoy himself. Emily closed her eyes for a moment and released a heavy breath, as if releasing something else as well. Then she opened her eyes and looked directly at Eric. "Please let me come, Master." Her voice held desire and a hint of desperation, but no hesitation. Since she had made this decision, she would stick with it. Eric was surprised she went as far as calling a master and highly doubted she would do so again, but simply smiled and patted her head before nodding to a still pouting Alora. Of course, his beloved partner was mature enough not to throw a tantrum, so she simply sighed, removed the orgasm lock from Emily, and pressed the vibrator against the girl's sensitive pussy for the last time. It took less than a second for her to scream and orgasm so loudly. It would have traveled all the way back to Kirkins if it hadn't been for Alora's sigils. She immediately fainted afterwards. Finally done with all this, Eric sighed and leaned back into the sofa, where Alora shortly joined him. She had lost her pout and kissed Eric on the cheek. "Well, I admit I was hoping for a slightly different ending, but this is fine too. Plus, I had fun. Eric chuckled happily. I'm glad. Alora looked at his still erect cock and giggled lustfully before straddling him, pulling her outfit aside and inserting Eric inside. She, too, had become awfully excited after all that. Eric smiled and embraced his partner happily. It didn't take long before they both came in a gentle and loving manner. When they were done, Eric kissed Alora on the lips and stood up. Alora swapped her dominatrix outfit for her regular clothes and followed him. They unstrapped the exhausted and sleeping Emily from the device before Alora put it back in her storage jewel. She also put the clothes she had taken from the girl back on her with a wave of her hand. Next, Eric put Emily on the only bed in the cabin and walked towards Emma, who had also fainted in a puddle of her own liquids. Emma had asked to be punished as well, but it appeared this would have to wait for another time. Or perhaps it would simply be forgotten about. He chuckled and asked Alora to clean the girl up before putting her next to Emily in the bed. He then went to lie down on the sofa, closed his eyes, and sighed. He, too, was tired after all that. If not physically, then at least mentally. But he was not fated for sleep just yet, as the featherweight of Alora's smaller form landed on his chest. He opened his eyes and smiled at her. I suppose we still need to talk about a few things. Alora smiled back and nodded. You remembered something significant before that vampire showed up, right? At that cafe. Eric looked thoughtful. Maybe, but I'm not entirely sure. My father mentioned something about my mother being special, an uncertain future, and my destiny. Here, let me show you. He shared his memories with her, and soon, Alora had seen the same scene. She looked equally thoughtful now. At the time, it seemed perfectly innocent. I was just a 15-year-old kid, but now. Eric mumbled. Alora nodded as she thoughtfully stroked her chin. Yeah, now it seems like more than that. It's entirely possible your parents, or at least your mother, were one of the people already aware of Ethereum and was probably already a first-rank runebound at the time. Not to mention that she may have known something about what that dream back in London was about. She looked regretful. It's a shame we can't ask her. Before suddenly looking awkward, it's a shame she's not around, period. Eric snickered and used a finger to caress her small head. I know what you meant. Don't worry. I still miss them, but I've accepted their death. Then he frowned, and fury flashed across his face. Or I will, after I've avenged them. Alora sent comforting emotions through their link, and Eric soon calmed down. Anyway, perhaps we'll still discover something in Frostwick. If my old home still stands, that is. The fairy nodded. We'll soon find out. Then she moved on to the next point. What about the fact that Frostwick was not the only place that was raided that night? And all in the same way? Even if some people possess power and knowledge that they shouldn't in this world, making so many time bomb babies still seems like a stretch. There was also something else about this method of attack that was brought into question. Still, Alora wanted to see if Eric would arrive at that thought on his own. And if he didn't, she wasn't sure if she wanted to bring it up. But evidently, he didn't, as he simply shrugged. If you have no idea how they did that, then I surely have none either. Perhaps we'll discover their methods when we find Etta. Alora wondered if Eric was purposefully ignoring the obvious possibility or if his fury blinded him. Regardless, she decided not to bring it up for now. Chances were he wouldn't listen to her anyway. Perhaps she could discover the truth herself when they found Etta and discuss it with Eric then. So, instead, she simply nodded with a smile. Perhaps we will. Anyway, I think that was all the important stuff. Assuming we're still not planning on getting involved in this Dominion versus Enclave business. Eric shook his head. Not unless you see a reason, no. Let the council figure it out when they finally reach here. Alora giggled in response and nodded. Good idea. Having discussed everything they needed to, Alora turned into her larger form and rested her head on Eric's chest while he folded his arms around her. Soon, they fell into a blissful sleep. The following day, Eric woke up slowly with the feeling of Alora's voluptuous body pressed against his. Soft morning light spread throughout the small cabin while a tiny bit of black smoke still rose from the fireplace. His senses immediately told him something was moving around in the apartment, which was likely what woke him up in the first place. A quick glance to the side told him that it was Emily who was already moving about. It was a great surprise to Eric, as he expected the girl to sleep for quite a while after last night. I wonder how much she will acknowledge of last night. We needed that situation to make her vulnerable enough to be open to the idea of giving up a little control, but the danger is in whether or not she feels regret now. He pondered. She appeared to be busy doing some stretches and exercises. It wouldn't be strange if her body ached a little after yesterday's long trek through the cold wilderness, followed by her ordeal in the pillory, even with Ethereum to nourish her body. Noticing his movement, Emily looked up and saw him looking at her curiously. The raven-haired girl stopped what she was doing and smirked at him. "Morning, boss. Wondering if I'll stab you in your sleep after last night?" Eric raised an eyebrow and curled his mouth into a half-smirk. "Boss, huh? That's not exactly what you called me last night." Meanwhile, he thought, still, that's promising. I don't need her to call me master, anyway, so long as she willingly follows my lead. He ignored her question. After all, they both knew the covenant would prevent Emily from harming him. Emily scoffed. "Yeah, well, I was pretty delirious back then. Calling you master is still a little too slavery-esque for me." She sighed, "But I will stand by my words from last night. From now on, I'll put my trust in you and follow willingly." She rolled her eyes. "I just wish you weren't such a pervert and had just talked to me about all that during dinner." Eric had to laugh softly. "Come now. Are you telling me you would have listened in that situation? By making you vulnerable, I allowed you to look past your hang-up on being in control and see the greater good for what it is." Emily rolled her eyes. "Don't pretend you didn't enjoy doing that to me. That little fairy of yours certainly did." Eric grinned knowingly at her, but didn't answer. Emily became a little uncomfortable under his gaze. "What are you looking at?" He shrugged, or as much as he could in his horizontal position with Alora on top of him. "Well, first of all, you enjoyed yourself plenty too." Then he smiled genuinely at her. "But mostly, I'm glad to see you this way. You're not afraid, angry, annoyed, or uncertain. You're just you, and I think Emma will enjoy that, too." The once goth rocker girl blushed a little and looked away. "Shut up." A playful grin appeared on Eric's face. "That's shut up, boss to you." But the girl just presented him with her middle finger, causing Eric to laugh. He liked this more comfortable Emily. It already appeared like the corruption had less of an effect on her now that she had come to terms with some of her inner feelings. Suddenly, Emily became more serious and crouched beside Eric's face. "Anyway, there's something I wanted to talk about regarding the things you said yesterday. About my fear." Eric matched her seriousness and nodded. "All right, tell me." Emily scratched her cheek in a surprisingly cute manner. "Well, first of all, you were right. I didn't want to acknowledge it before, but I was afraid of myself. Or rather, fearful of what I might do to Emma if the corruption took hold again. Yet, I couldn't allow myself to look weak before you. I'd already thoroughly embarrassed and humiliated myself right after I was freed by begging you to either do more or kill me." She sighed, and after I had some time to think, I realized I had no reason to trust you, and I couldn't let you think you'd walk all over me because of what I said in that basement. So I may have gone a little too far in the opposite direction. Emily offered him a small, grateful smile. "Anyway, what I mean is, thank you for not giving up on me. You could have easily let Alora turn me back into her puppet, but you chose the harder path. It took me a while, but I see that now, and I appreciate it more than you know." Her expression shifted, the seriousness returning, but with a flicker of unease in her eyes. "But there's something else, something we didn't talk about last night. Another reason why I fear myself." Eric's curiosity piqued, his eyebrow arching. "I'm all ears. What did we miss?" A disturbing change overtook Emily. Her eyes briefly danced with a wild, corrupt red, and her smile twisted, revealing a glimpse of something dark and exhilarating within her. "I enjoy it, boss. The surge of power, the intoxicating freedom, playing God with life and death. It's exhilarating." She visibly shuddered, casting away the haunting smile for a look of genuine fear. "But that scares me. I don't want to go on a rampage, murdering any innocent to first come across. That was another reason I gave in to your offer last night. Not only do I need you to keep me from harming Emily, I also want you to keep me pointed in the right direction so I don't go on a killing spree just for the fun of it. Eric, slightly taken aback but not entirely surprised, understood the depth of her struggle. He had seen the girl's crazy smile while slaughtering ghouls. After all, he caressed her cheek. "Don't worry, just follow my lead, and you'll only ever kill our enemies." A relieved smile blossomed on Emily's face, her trust in Eric solidifying. The recent events in Kirkins had been a turning point for her, and after the whirlwind of last night's perverted adventure and a night of restful sleep, she felt ready to face her new reality. Seeing that the serious part of the morning was done, Eric smirked. "Good girl. Now, you can thank me with a kiss." Emily immediately narrowed her eyes. "I'm pretty sure you promised no more perverted crap." But Eric didn't relent and kept smirking. "Whoa, you consider kissing perverted? I thought a rebellious girl like you would be a little more liberated than that." He shrugged nonchalantly. "But fine, no kisses then." He was about to turn his head and wake Alora when Emily's head suddenly shot forward and pressed her lips against his. It wasn't a peck either, and quickly turned into a much deeper kiss, with plenty of Eric's delicious saliva finding its way into Emily's mouth. The black-eyed girl couldn't help but moan a little. It was a few minutes before they finally separated, and Emily panted with a slightly dazed look on her face. Eric smacked his mouth a little as he could still taste the girl's sweet lips before smirking curiously at her, waiting for an explanation. After Emily recovered, she grinned at him. "Damn, did Alora really change your entire body to become so delicious? Because that's pretty unfair." Then she looked a little embarrassed, but didn't lose her grin. "Anyway, perhaps a little perverted stuff now, and then wouldn't be so bad." Suddenly, a third face stuck itself between the two of them with a grin. "I like the sound of that. Don't worry. Your mommy and master will treat you well." Alora chirped. Emily yelped and jumped back before glaring at the fairy. It seemed she had forgotten Alora was even there, but her expression was a clear rejection of Alora's offer. Alora didn't mind and just giggled at her behavior. "Well, I don't mind." Then she winked. "Besides, Mommy will still get her hands on you during punishments." Hearing Alora refer to herself as Mommy again made Emily shiver, but she ignored the taunts and simply turned around to see if Emma had woken up yet. Alora turned to Eric with a mischievous grin. "I don't think she likes me much." Eric chuckled and kissed his beloved partner on the lips. "It's her loss." To which Alora sat up and puffed out her chest. "That's right." And she leaned over again and pecked Eric on the lips. "All right, you have a good morning. I'm going to continue resting." Next, she disappeared into a cloud of light specks and entered Eric's soul. He smiled and shook his head before getting up and donning his armor. After Emma had woken up and gotten over her embarrassment from last night, it didn't take long before the group left the cabin and returned to the road. They didn't know it yet, but today would prove to be eventful. Seeing Astrid again caused Eric's mind to travel back to a simpler time. It was now 11 years in the past, 4 years before the awakening and Edda's betrayal. Eric and Edda were both 14 years old at this point. The icy wind of Kirkins and winter swept through the still bustling harbor, carrying with it the salty tang of the sea and distant echoes of what few hardy seagulls stayed in the north rather than migrate to the south. There is no sun in the sky, despite being midday, as Kirkins was currently at the start of its polar midnight phase, where the sun wouldn't return for at least 2 months. Instead, street lanterns and a twilight gloom lit up the harbor. Eric, his silver-gray hair tousled by the breeze, stood beside Edda as they looked out over the harbor crowd. His eyes, reflecting a timidity that would shock anyone who met him in later years, wandered over the crates and ropes that littered the docks. Edda, bright-eyed and brimming with excitement, tugged at his sleeve. "Come on, Eric. It's finally the time of year when we can meet up with Astrid again. Let's go find her." As vampires, Astrid and the community she lived in would usually go for supplies at night. Only during the polar midnight period would Astrid's mother agree to bring her here during the day. After all, before the awakening, vampires still had trouble staying under the sunlight. Despite Edda's enthusiasm, Eric looked a little reluctant. He didn't dislike Astrid per se. He just preferred spending time alone with the girl he loved instead. But he could never refuse Edda anything, especially not when her enthusiasm was as high as it was right now. So he put away his reluctance and gave Etta a timid smile before nodding. Yeah, let's go. But before they could move, Eric was suddenly jumped from behind by a slightly older girl who tousled his hair with her fist and laughed loudly. Looking for me, are ya? Etta's face lit up at seeing her friend again after many months. They tried to meet up in between the polar midnight phases, but it was difficult and often didn't work out. Luckily, they could always stay in contact over the internet. Astrid, she said happily and jumped in to hug Eric and Astrid at the same time, as Eric was still held hostage by the vampire girl. The younger Eric just closed his eyes and sighed, letting it happen, even if he was slightly annoyed. The fact was, Astrid was not only older, but also a vampire, which meant she had constant access to her full strength, while Eric would have to change to his werewolf form first. And it's not like he could show his wolf form in the middle of a busy dock filled with regular humans. Astrid continued to laugh as she rubbed Eric's head with her fist. Etta, it's good to see you, girl. Finally, she and Etta let Eric go and stepped back a little. Astrid was a 16-year-old vampire with strawberry blonde hair, typical red vampire eyes, and pale skin. She was still growing, of course, but as a 16-year-old, her beauty was already apparent. Seeing the disgruntled look on Eric's face, Astrid chuckled sheepishly. Sorry, buddy. I know you don't like that, but I can't help myself. It's good to see you. She pouted a little. I wish you would respond to my messages a little more often. I missed you, you bastard. Eric sighed. Despite her behavior and the fact he preferred to hang with Etta alone, he did care for Astrid, even if it hadn't always been that way. Their little trio of friends had actually started from the basis of Eric and Astrid rather than Astrid and Etta, as one might have expected. It all started 2 years ago when Eric was 12 and Astrid was 14. Astrid was almost the complete opposite of Eric, a rabble-rouser and a troublemaker who loved to get into fights. The problem was her community had very few kids her own age. So, she naturally got intrigued when she heard from her mother about this shapeshifter kid from Frostvik who could win fights against people 2 or even 3 years older than him. So, as soon as the next polar midnight rolled around, she convinced her mother to arrange a meeting in Kirkins. Unfortunately for Astrid, it didn't exactly go as planned. Despite Eric's strength and skill, he didn't really enjoy fighting and only did it to appease his parents. But since nothing forced him to accept this random vampire girl's challenge, he simply ignored her. Yet, Astrid didn't give up so easily and over the next month continued to pester Eric, hoping he would finally accept. Eric naturally grew annoyed as Astrid seriously cut into the time he could spend with Etta. During this time, Etta tried to befriend Astrid, but was wholly ignored, as the vampire girl was entirely focused on getting Eric to accept her challenge. Eventually, Eric decided it was better to accept the challenge and get it over with, so she would hopefully leave him alone. But unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Eric managed to defeat Astrid despite being 2 years younger, and the vampire girl gained an obsession because of it. After that event, Eric found it entirely impossible to get rid of the vampire, so he reluctantly stopped resisting her friendship. Soon after that, Astrid and Etta became friends as well. Eric scratched his head awkwardly. Yeah, sorry about that. You know how it is. First, you wait a little while to respond because you're busy with something. Then you procrastinate for some other reason, and eventually it just becomes too awkward to still respond. Then he smiled softly. But it's good to see you again, too, Astrid. Astrid, whose obsession with Eric had long since turned into a crush despite their age and racial difference, only heard the last part as she put her hands on her hips and laughed. Of course it is. Then, her eyes lit up with excitement as she asked the same question she always did when they saw each other again. You want to spar? At this point, for Astrid, the sparring was just as much about the fight as it was about spending time alone with Eric without Etta. But Eric realized none of this. In typical young boy fashion, his entire being was absolutely obsessed with one specific girl while ignoring any and all others. And that girl was Etta, not Astrid. Eric sighed, still not a particular fan of fighting. Come on, Astrid. We always do that, and it leaves Etta with nothing to do. How about we just walk around a little? Astrid pouted. Come on. Just a quickie. Just like Eric, Astrid was a little clueless about some things. Some people walking by momentarily halted when they heard a 16-year-old girl mentioning a quickie. Still, they all decided it was none of their business and moved on. Edda, the only one not so clueless between the three of them, giggled at Astrid's choice of words before turning to Eric with a cheeky smile. "Oh, just give her what she wants, Eric. Get her hard, okay? I'll just watch from the side." Neither Astrid nor Eric understood what was so funny, but Astrid didn't care either as she cheered. "Yeah, come on, let's go." She grabbed Eric's sleeve and, under his exasperated sigh, pulled him along to find their usual spot just outside the town. Unfortunately, along the way, they ran across a group of slightly older vampires, finally able to explore the town again during the daytime, who decided to cause trouble for the trio, particularly for the weak human girl with them. Seeing the malice and curiosity in their eyes, Eric tensed up and instinctively moved close to Edda when the group blocked their path. He may be timid, but he would protect Edda with his life if it came to that. Yet, he also knew he couldn't simply transform right now. They were in a relatively quiet area, but the risk was still high that a random human might see him. He ground his teeth in frustration as he thought of a way out. Sensing the rising tension, Edda clutched Eric's arm, her cheerful demeanor fading into apprehension, appearing aware of her vulnerability as the only human in the group. Astrid, however, stepped forward, her posture radiating confidence. "Got a problem, jackass?" she challenged, her strawberry blonde hair seeming like a fiery halo in the dim light. The leader of the opposite group, a tall, 16 or 17-year-old vampire with a sneering expression, looked them over. "What's this? A little mixed gathering? You still hanging around with the mutt and the human?" Astrid. Their group consisted of vampires from various communities. Still, their leader just so happened to be from the same village as Astrid. Astrid's eyes narrowed, and her voice was ice. "They're my friends. More than I can say for you, you little shit. Already forgotten the last time I beat you up for thinking you could get handsy with me?" The leader laughed, his gaze lingering on Edda. "Come now, Astrid. Why protect a human? You're outnumbered here, and she's nothing but—" Before he could finish, Astrid lunged forward, her vampiric speed a blur. She tackled him to the ground, her fists connecting with his face before the others could react. The rest of the group moved to intervene, but Astrid was a whirlwind of fury, her movements swift and precise. Eric still held back while holding on to Edda as he prepared to transform if there was no other choice. He felt a surge of admiration and fear for Astrid. He wasn't unhappy with himself, but sometimes he wanted to have that kind of determination. Suddenly, the fight ceased as quickly as it had begun. Astrid stood up, the leader of the vampire group lying dazed and bloody on the ground. His companions, too late to save him, quickly helped him up as they cast wary glances at Astrid. "Next time you talk about one of my friends like that, I'll rip your fangs out of your mouth and stuff them in your ass," Astrid hissed, her eyes still blazing. The opposing group, now more cautious, slowly backed away and then dispersed, leaving the trio alone. Astrid turned to Eric and Edda, her expression softening. "You guys okay?"